Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your spoon placement could spark a scandal. Your waist was expected to be smaller than your hat, and saying hello out of turn could socially annihilate you. Welcome to Victorian Britain. You've just been invited to visit a respectable family's home, and you're about to discover that even entering a room can be a dangerous minefield of etiquette. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy history caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out of the rattling carriage and already feel underdressed. Your gloves are cream, should they have been dove grey? You're not sure, but the butler's glance seems to say, "You'll regret that." The door opens with a slow creak, and suddenly, you're inside a drawing room. Not a living room, no. That would be scandalously casual. Drawing rooms are where society sees you, judges you, and smiles sweetly while doing it. You walk in. You do not under any circumstances sit. Not unless the hostess says you may. The armchair by the fireplace is tempting, but that's the matriarch's throne, and occupying it would be the Victorian equivalent of walking into someone's wedding wearing a white dress, shouting, "Your vows are a lie." You're offered tea. You accept, but not too eagerly. You take the cup in your right hand, saucer in your left, pinky not quite extended, only caricatures do that, and sip, not slurp, not gulp, and heaven help you. If the teaspoon clinks against the cup, it's practically a siren scream in this gentle chamber of quiet judgment. Your host's daughter enters. You are not to look her in the eye unless introduced. You may nod softly, not like you're trying to hail a cab, but any spoken greeting before proper introductions would be a breach. The Victorians loved rules because they loved control. And what better way to gatekeep class and status than with a set of behavioural expectations so complicated they make chess look like hopscotch? The furniture around you is stiff, not only in posture but in purpose. You notice the antimacassars, those embroidered doilies on the chairs. They're not just decorative. They protect the upholstery from the hair oil that polite gentlemen slathered on daily. It's a detail easily missed, but not in this house. In fact, if your hair smells faintly of the wrong brand, you might not get a second invitation. You look to your side and notice the cabinet of curiosities. Fossils, taxidermy birds, maybe a bit of coral or a pine cone from some exotic travel. It's not there for beauty, it's a display of intellect. It says, "We are educated. We collect dead things tastefully." A clock ticks, loudly, almost in judgment. Time matters here, especially when it comes to how long you stay. Too short, and you're aloof. Too long, and you're tiresome. There's a perfect number of minutes to linger before politely making your exit historians still argue whether it was closer to 30 or 45. But no one dared to stay past the moment when sherry was not offered. And then comes the moment when you're asked to sit. A miracle. You gently lower yourself into a side chair, not the couch, which invites intimacy, and not the rocker, which implies old age. Your posture must be straight, not stiff. You must appear relaxed, but not too relaxed. Remember, in the Victorian mind, comfort is the gateway drug to moral decay. Someone asks about your family. It's not curiosity, it's a status check. You mention your uncle, the rector, and earn a pleased nod. You mention your cousin, the actress, and watch smiles freeze like porcelain teacups in a snowstorm. Not ideal. You recover by mentioning your love of reading, but say Dickens instead of penny dreadfuls. Points restored. You glance at the window. Heavy drapes, drawn halfway, filter the light. Victorians feared sun exposure. Tanned skin was for labourers, and pale complexions were prized, even if they were achieved with arsenic powder. Yes, arsenic. A fun little tidbit from the era. Some women routinely applied toxic substances for the perfect ghostly glow. Beauty was pain. Or, in this case, slow poisoning. By now, you've survived 20 minutes without offending anyone. That's practically sainthood. A servant appears with a tray of biscuits. Do you take the one closest to you or the prettiest one? Trick question. You wait for your host to choose first. Always. Even if the prettiest biscuit calls to you like a sugar-coated siren. Just before you leave, you spot the piano in the corner. If you're a lady, you're expected to offer a tune. Not too flashy, though no show-off bravura. Chopin is safe. Liszt is risky. Music must soothe, not seduce. You finally rise gracefully and prepare your farewell. You don't say, "Thanks for having me." You say, "What a delightful visit. Your company was most agreeable." You nod. You smile. You do not hug. You exit the room, the door shuts behind you, and you exhale for the first time in an hour. Congratulations. You have survived the Victorian drawing room. Just 24 more scenarios to go. Your ribs still feel compressed from that last visit. And unfortunately, it's not about to get any easier. Because now you must dress for dinner. And let's just say, comfort was not a guiding principle of Victorian fashion. You stand before your wardrobe, eyeing the complex rigmarole of layers and laces, and realize dressing was a sport. Except the only prize was social approval, and maybe a fainting spell. You slip into your chemise first, the lightweight cotton underlayer meant to keep your sweat off the more expensive outer garments. Then comes the corset. Ah yes, the corset. It's not the rib-snapping villain some modern media suggests. But it's not exactly a hug either. You tighten it inch by inch. One tug, two, then the tug that makes your breath stall and your vision spot. The goal isn't just a smaller waist, it's posture. Stand like a duchess, or else. And remember, if you're unmarried, your corset must be white. No exceptions. Even the colour of your underclothes tells the world your status. Yes, they can't see it. No, that doesn't matter. Someone always knows. Victorian society was like a nosy aunt with X-ray vision. You layer on your petticoats, sometimes up to 7 if the occasion calls for it. That swoosh you hear when you walk? That's not elegance, it's the sound of your thighs giving up. The outer gown comes next, with its fastenings in the back. You can't reach them yourself. That's what a maid is for, unless you're middle class and have to bribe your younger sibling with sugar lumps and lies. Now gloves. Never leave without them. Bare hands are scandalous, darling. The only people who go gloveless are stable boys and French impressionists. And you, good listener, are not that kind of rebel. Yet. Gloves aren't just for warmth. They're social armor. Wearing them says, "I am proper." Removing them signals readiness for intimacy. A woman could remove a glove at a ball, and suddenly the room would buzz. Was it accidental? Was it a message? Was she gasped too warm? Even how you hold your gloves matters. Don't roll them. Don't stuff them in your bag. You must fold them with reverence, as if they were small velvet scrolls from the Queen herself. Some etiquette manual devoted entire page to glove protocol. Historians still argue whether that's brilliant or completely unhinged. Now you grab your reticule, a tiny, impractical purse that barely holds a handkerchief. It's not for carrying things. It's for having a thing to carry. It swings from your wrist like a social cue. Empty, but powerful. The symbol of polite preparedness. Shoes? They're narrow, delicate, and about as supportive as a disapproving aunt. But they show off your ankles scandalous, yes, but still somehow expected. You walk in mincing steps, not because you're dainty, but because if you stride, your skirts might lift, and someone might glimpse your calves. Now the finishing touch, your hair. It must be up, unless you're under 16 or planning to faint at a funeral. Ringlets, combs, or even fake plaits are fine. Wigs? Only for men unless you're pretending to be ancient royalty, or on the stage. And we all know what Victorians thought of actresses. You glance in the mirror and marvel. You've become a social chimera, half armor, half art. But your body is beginning to protest. Your lungs press against your ribs like crumpled parchment. Your feet whisper cruel nothings to your brain, and you realize you haven't sat down in 37 minutes. You can't. If you sit wrong, the whole cage of petticoats collapses like a soufflé. You reach for a fan, decorative, yes, but also functional. In summer, the corset and layers become an oven. So, women fan themselves constantly not just for relief, but to avoid the dreaded glow. Victorian women didn't sweat. They glistened, and only in candlelight. As you prepare to leave for the evening's dinner, you feel that creeping tightness in your shoulder blades, that prickly sweat along your spine, evidence that your body is not, in fact, thrilled about your new identity as a fashionable plank. And don't forget, if your gloves are stained, your corset squeaks, or your gown rustles too loudly, someone will notice. Someone always notices. The elite didn't need Twitter to cancel people. They had whispers, fans, and the power of icy stares. You step out of your room, gracefully gliding down the hallway, your back straight, not because of pride, but because your corset demands it. You catch sight of yourself in the hall mirror. There she is, a perfect Victorian lady. Except you're not breathing. Like, at all. You take one shallow breath and pray dinner ends early. You've made it downstairs without tripping over your skirts or passing out from lack of oxygen. A small miracle, really. But now, the real test begins. Afternoon tea. A seemingly innocent gathering of teacups and cakes, it is in fact a battlefield of unspoken rules, invisible landmines, and weaponized sugar cubes. You enter the drawing room again, the one with the stiff chairs and judgmental clock, but this time it smells faintly of rosewater and warm scones. The tea tray is set. The hostess smiles sweetly. You smile back and silently panic. You take your place not at the table, mind you. That would be far too practical. You sit on the edge of a delicately upholstered chair, one ankle behind the other, hands folded, trying not to wrinkle your skirt or your composure. The maid pours the tea, always from right to left. You notice the china pattern blue willow. Elegant, understated. You nod approvingly, as though you know something about porcelain. You don't, but appearances matter more than knowledge here. Sugar? 1 lump, never 2. 2 is greedy, 3 is social suicide. Unless you're the host's child, then you can do anything and be called precocious. Everyone else must sip like they're rationing nectar from the gods. You add a touch of milk after the tea, not before. The milk first or after debate has raged for centuries. Historians still argue whether it was about taste or class, but in this house, after is correct. Before is for farmers and foreigners. A plate of cakes is offered. Small ones, neatly arranged in concentric circles. You pause. Which one do you take? Not the center that's presumptuous, not the biggest that's gluttonous. You go for the slightly misshapen shortbread on the outer edge. Polite, modest, a bit sad. Next comes the real danger, conversation. You're expected to engage. Lightly, breezily, as if you weren't holding your cup with trembling fingers while trying to remember which duchess recently lost her spaniel. You comment on the weather, not politics. You compliment the tea, not the silverware it would suggest you're casing the joint. You nod as someone discusses their latest piano piece. You mention that you do a little embroidery, never say you love it. Passion is too intense for polite company. You smile when the hostess says her cousin is engaged to a baronet. You do not mention that you once saw that baronet passed out in a garden at a Mayfair party. And then comes the most terrifying moment. Cake hierarchy. The cake stand is brought out. 3 tiers. Sponge cakes on top. Currant buns in the middle. Clotted cream scones at the bottom. You wait. Everyone waits. The hostess selects first. Her choice tells you everything: what's safe to take, what's aspirational, what's off limits. She takes a plain scone. Interesting. That means the eclairs are fair game, maybe. You hesitate. A gentleman reaches forward and takes one. Too soon. Too bold. Everyone clocks it. He smiles too confidently. His waistcoat is too tight. He has violated the pastry pecking order. A subtle scandal has just unfolded over custard and flour. You take a currant bun. Safe. Classic. Slightly dry. Like the conversation. Just when things seem to be flowing, someone makes a grave mistake. A loud laugh. It cuts across the air like a guillotine. Everyone freezes. The offender blushes, coughs politely, and mutters something about hay fever. Crisis narrowly averted. There are unspoken rules to laughter. Delicate titters are acceptable. Unrestrained joy is suspect. After all, what if people think you're too human? You shift slightly in your seat. Your corset has fused to your spine. Your gloves are growing clammy. You hope no one notices the teaspoon resting diagonally on your saucer. It's supposed to be perfectly parallel. And still, The conversation floats along. Did you hear about Lady Hargrave's new governess? Someone asks. You shake your head demurely. You have. Everyone has. The governess is apparently too pretty, which is code for she'll be sacked by Tuesday. Topics move to gardening, to poetry, to that new scandalous novel by some obscure Frenchman. Someone says, "Of course, I don't read that sort of thing." You nod along. You read it twice. Dog. Eared it. Hid it behind your hymnal. Then comes a comment about your dress. A compliment. You accept it graciously. You do not return one. Too eager. Too obvious. Instead, you say, "You're always so tasteful." Praise that sounds like it came from a curated column in the ladies' magazine. Time passes. Slowly. Like clotted cream on cold china. You've had 1.5 biscuits, 3 sips of tea, and successfully dodged 8 conversational traps. A personal best. And then the hostess places her napkin gently on the table. That's the cue. Afternoon tea is over. No one says it, but everyone knows it. You rise with care, smile without showing teeth, too American, and offer a shallow curtsy. The men bow, the children stare, the dog sighs. You've survived tea, barely. And now dinner looms. The air is thicker now, not with heat, but with anticipation. Dinner is approaching. And in Victorian society, dinner isn't just a meal. It's a ceremony, a test, a performance. One where forks become weapons, spoons carry coded meaning, and a sneeze at the wrong time could exile you to social Siberia. You return to your room to refresh. You're told to change for dinner, which really means completely reconstruct your wardrobe. Afternoon attire will not do. It's time for silk, satin, and possibly some family jewels, assuming you have any. If not, a tasteful brooch passed off as heirloom will suffice, as long as no one asks too many questions. Your gown is darker now. Deeper colours are expected in the evening. Soft lilac or slate blue if you're modest, emerald or burgundy if you're feeling bold. Black? Only for widows or Parisian rebels. The décolletage dips slightly lower, but not low enough to raise eyebrows, just enough to raise the temperature in the room by 1 subtle degree. You descend the stairs just in time to be received in the drawing room once again, where sherry or port is served before dinner. You take a glass and pretend to sip. No one drinks heavily before a formal meal, not unless they're over 50 or have completely given up. The host glances toward the grandfather clock. It's time. You're escorted into the dining room. A long, heavy table stretches before you, dressed in white linen and bristling with silverware. Forks, knives, spoons, so many of them. It's less a place setting and more an archaeological dig. You sit finally, and your knees graze the stiff edge of the tablecloth. You fold your napkin not in your collar, how vulgar, but neatly in your lap, like a delicate woolen promise. First rule, work from the outside in. If you mistake your oyster fork for your dessert fork, no one will gasp, but someone will definitely raise an eyebrow and record your failure in the permanent social ledger. Your soup arrives. You don't slurp. You don't blow. You tilt. Always away from you, as if pushing danger to the horizon. You sip from the side of the spoon. You pray it's not turtle soup. It is. You pretend to enjoy it. The gelatinous texture is regrettable. The next course arrives, and with it comes conversation. You're seated between 2 people assigned carefully by the host, in a delicate dance of class, age, and conversational stamina. Your job is to speak to the person on your right for the first course, then the person on your left for the second. This isn't just etiquette, it's choreography. Break it, and you'll step on toes you didn't know existed. Your gentleman neighbour mentions pheasant hunting. You nod politely, even though you've never held a gun or a pheasant. You ask whether he prefers Northumberland to the Cotswolds, 2 places you're fairly sure are real. He seems pleased. You've passed the geography test. Then tragedy strikes. You reach for your wineglass and realise you've chosen the wrong one. The claret, not the sherry. It's a minor sin, recoverable. But still, you feel the eyes. You adjust. You smile. You continue as if nothing happened. Then comes the fish course, and with it the dreaded fish knife. It's a peculiar instrument. Part blade, part shovel, part enigma. You use it to gently prod the delicate fillet, trying not to scatter it like battlefield debris. The sauce dribbles. You dab not wipe with your napkin. Crisis narrowly averted. And now, the main course. Roast beef, potatoes, a medley of overcooked greens. It arrives under a silver dome, which the footman removes with theatrical flair. You pretend to be impressed. You whisper, "Thanks." You glance down and realize your knife is at the wrong angle. You panics. Just a little. You correct it. Slowly. No sudden movements. Your neighbor mentions politics. You smile but say nothing. In Victorian society, only two people are allowed political opinions, landed men and Queen Victoria. And even she kept hers cryptic. Next course, salad. Oddly placed near the end, but that's tradition. You marvel at how the lettuce is barely dressed. It's essentially a whisper of greenery, but you chew delicately, as though it's a revelation. Then, dessert. A pudding, possibly made from suet, possibly alive. You take a polite bite and pray it doesn't jiggle too much. A fringe fact. Victorian kitchens often used isinglass of fish, derived gelatin to stabilize desserts. Historians still argue whether this was innovative or disgusting. Either way, it tastes vaguely of regret. You decline a second helping. Always decline the second helping unless it's offered twice. That's the dance. Finally, cheese. A few modest wedges, served with dry biscuits and a faint air of fatigue. The conversation quiets. People are full. People are judging. You've made it this far. Coffee is offered in the drawing room. The ladies rise first. The men stay behind for cigars and port. You stand, glide, and hope your corset hasn't left a permanent bruise on your ribs. You offer a final smile to your dinner partners. One nods, one doesn't. Social success. Inconclusive. But at least you didn't drop a spoon. You think the worst is over. You've navigated tea, endured dinner, avoided eye contact with the pheasant, and sidestepped a suet-based tragedy. But now comes the most perilous terrain of all conversation etiquette. Specifically, the terrifying rules of when and how you're allowed to speak in Victorian society. You rejoin the ladies in the drawing room after dinner. The men are still in the dining room, murmuring over cigars, puffing away on small rebellions women aren't allowed to enjoy. You sit on the edge of a chaise longue, back straight, ankles crossed, eyes politely unfocused, ready for small talk combat. Silence stretches. A lady near the fireplace coughs into her glove. That's the signal. Conversation may now begin. A woman to your right comments on the weather, not just in general, but in prose, so lyrical you wonder if she's reading from a script. You're expected to respond with equal poetic flair, but not too clever. Wit is a dangerous thing in the wrong mouth, and in Victorian England, a woman's mouth was expected to hold fewer opinions and more agreeable sighs. Someone mentions a charity ball. You nod with enthusiasm, not too much though. Excess enthusiasm implies desperation. The lady across from you smiles and says, "Oh, were you in attendance at the Duchess of Strathmore's garden soiree?" You weren't. You pretend you were. The lilies were remarkable, you say. Safe, vague, acceptable. Then a man enters the room, one of the younger ones, flushed from brandy. He bows. All the women stand, every single one. It's not a rule written anywhere, but breaking it would be like insulting the Queen's hairstyle. Introductions follow. You can't speak to him directly until someone formally connects your names like matchmakers of conversation. The Victorian rulebook made talking feel like crossing a river on stepping stones. Miss one, and splash, into social disgrace you go. Finally, someone makes the match. "Mr. Avery, may I present Miss," and your name is spoken with delicate cadence, like it's been embroidered on a pillow. You nod. He bows again. You may now exchange mild pleasantries. Not opinions, not questions, not ideas. Heaven forbid you ask him what he thinks about something. He might vaporize on the spot. A common misstep here is being too forward. Say too much, and you're brash. Say too little, and you're cold. The middle path is narrow and treacherous. You're expected to speak in the conversational equivalent of a watercolor, soft, unobtrusive, and slightly floral. A bit of historical color here. Victorian etiquette books literally mapped out conversation flowcharts. Topics appropriate for the drawing room included the weather, art, gardening, light travel, and maybe a vague reference to recent church sermons. Topics to avoid: politics, money, illness, unless poetic, child, rearing, unless it's to praise a governess, and dear Lord forbid bodily functions. Even saying leg was considered indelicate. Some women referred to limbs as lower appendages. Even the word trousers was suspect, hence unmentionables. So yes, your language is edited, censored, and run through a mental filter thicker than plum pudding. And what about expressing emotions? Well, that's a minefield of its own. Too cheerful, and you seem foolish. Too melancholic, and you're labelled delicate. Just melancholic enough, though, and you're romantic. It's why Victorian women perfected the art of the wistful sigh. A well-timed sigh was more powerful than 1,000 words. Meanwhile, the men finally re-enter the room, trailing tobacco-scented arrogance and residual port. They fan out like chess pieces, placing themselves near wives, mothers, or the most strategic marriage prospects. You are, like it or not, one of the latter. A gentleman sits beside you, too close, then slightly repositions himself. Better. He asks about your reading habits. You mention Tennyson, which is both poetic and safe. You do not mention Mary Wollstonecraft. Too revolutionary. You mention embroidery. Everyone relaxes. You're back in the safe zone. He offers a compliment. Not about your appearance, of course. That would be indecent. Instead, he praises your grace. This is code. Grace equals beauty. Poise equals breeding. Intelligence equals marry with caution. You smile. Thank him softly. Tilt your head slightly. Not too much. The goal is to suggest interest, not availability. Across the room, someone laughs too loudly. Again, the same woman from tea. She's playing with fire. Another guest covers her mouth with her fan not to giggle, but to obscure her frown. And then there's the silence. That strange loaded pause where everyone repositions their hands or glances at the clock. Conversation has a rhythm in Victorian society, rising, falling, and punctuated by the ticking of a mantel clock, the clink of a spoon, or the discreet clearing of a throat. A quirky tidbit for you. In some social circles, women carried conversation cards. These were tiny printed cheat sheets with acceptable topics, in case the mind went blank. Mention the Crimea. Ask after Lady Bexley's peacocks. Compliment the piano. You wonder if you could get away with one tonight. You cannot. That would be American. The evening begins to wind down. A footman discreetly enters and whispers to the hostess. She nods. The signal is clear. The guests begin to gather themselves. You rise, smooth your skirts, adjust your gloves, and prepare for your final performance of the night. The graceful farewell. No lingering, no gushing. Just a poised, murmured thank you, a slight dip of the head, and a retreat as smooth as a theatre curtain fall. Outside, the night air is cool. You finally breathe deeply. You said all the right things, or at least, none of the wrong ones. You wake the next morning with a sore jaw, bruised ribs, and a brain full of rehearsed phrases. You've survived another Victorian evening without social catastrophe. An impressive feat, though your corset may disagree. But today the script changes slightly. You're not a guest anymore. You're a resident in this grand home, perhaps as a distant cousin or companion, and that means you're expected to host. Or worse, initiate conversation. But don't worry, there's still time before that ordeal. Right now, you must complete your morning rituals without being indecently visible or alarmingly audible. You pad softly across the room in your dressing gown. If you're lucky enough to have a lady's maid, she'll arrive shortly with hot water and gentle judgment. If not, you're left to struggle with your stays alone, like a salmon attempting self-boning. Now, here's the curious thing. Victorian mornings were full of elaborate hygiene routines that rarely involved actual cleanliness. A little dab of rosewater behind the ears, a brisk dry brush to remove the sins of the night, a splash of lukewarm water from a porcelain pitcher, and of course, teeth brushing done with charcoal powder, crushed chalk, or occasionally baking soda that tastes like crushed dreams. You dress modestly this time. A high-necked morning gown, usually cotton or muslin, with sleeves down to the wrist and collar to the chin. The goal is to look presentable only to other women, and possibly your most judgmental aunt. Men are not to see you in this state unless it's a medical emergency or a marriage proposal. And honestly, those are often confused. You descend the back staircase. The front one is too grand for mornings. And that's when you hear them, the soft scuttling, the muffled footsteps, the quiet orchestration of invisible labor. Because while you sleep in layers of linen and lace, someone else is already polishing the silver and setting the fire. Yes, dear listener, this section belongs to the servants. You're not one of them. But if you were, you'd already have been up for 2 hours. Maybe more. Victorian servants were expected to move silently, like ghosts with brooms. They entered rooms sideways, never met your eye unless addressed, and definitely didn't speak unless spoken to. And when they did speak, it was usually to apologize for existing, mostly. Let's imagine you're the scullery maid, the lowest of the low. You sleep in the attic, or worse, near the damp kitchen hearth. Your bed is straw. Your pillow? Also straw. You rise at dawn, scrub the floors before anyone wakes, and you certainly don't take tea. You make it then disappear before the family enters the room. Now imagine being a lady's maid, a notch above, but still at the mercy of temper and teacups. You lace corsets, pin hair, patch underthings, and listen to your mistress complain about how exhausting it is to exist beautifully. You nod. You sympathize. You know more about her than her own mother, and you will take those secrets to your grave, or at least to the next household, where gossip becomes currency. A butler. He's like a general in the silent war of service. He commands the footman, polices the wine cellar, and ensures the roast arrives precisely 7 minutes after the soup. He may look composed, but internally he's calculating cutlery distances with military precision. Now back to you, the gently waking resident. Breakfast is not a communal event. It's taken privately, often on a tray in your room. Tea, toast, perhaps a soft egg. You nibble, not because you're not hungry, but because proper women do not appear to hunger, especially not before noon. You read. Possibly a letter, possibly the Morning Post, possibly nothing at all, because silence is the only acceptable soundtrack to breakfast. Eventually, you descend to the morning room, a softly lit space with embroidery frames, polite fiction, and a faint smell of lavender. Other women are there, in their own high-necked gowns, speaking in low tones about music, children, and the weather's effect on one's complexion. It's here you practice the art of appearing busy without achieving anything. You may write a note on perfumed paper. You may stitch one flower petal in a tapestry that's been in progress since the last monarch. You may organize your calling cards. Speaking of which, calling cards. Little rectangles of social intention, printed with your name, possibly your title, and always your place of residence. They are your ticket to the social game. You leave them. You accept them. You display them on little trays like trophies. The wrong paper stock, the wrong font, or a folded corner could ruin your chances of an invitation ever again. A quirky little fact. Folding the upper left corner of a calling card signaled a personal visit. Folding the bottom right meant congratulations. Folding both? A code historians still debate possibly grief, possibly just a clumsy fold. But today, you're not making visits. You're home, observing, listening, learning. You glance out the window. The gardener trims roses with the precision of a man afraid of hydrangeas. The milkman tips his hat without making eye contact. A horse clip-clops past, pulling a carriage full of starched collars and half-truths. All of it, the silence, the glances, the folded cards, builds into a symphony of structure. Victorian society wasn't just about money or titles. It was about rules, about knowing your place, and never, ever getting caught pretending to be more than what you were born. You return to your room. The morning passes in gentle murmurs, but beneath the calm surface you feel it, the tension, the pressure, the invisible weight of being proper. The day rolls on, and now you're expected to re-enter society, not the ballroom kind, but the casual, deadly serious version. A walk in the park. Sounds relaxing, doesn't it? A nice stroll, some fresh air, maybe a friendly hello to a passing acquaintance. Except, it's Victorian England. And in this world, even walking has rules. You're expected to take the air sometime between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. Not before too early, not after too suspicious. You must be seen but not noticed. Graceful, but not attention-seeking. A human swan glide, no flapping. You dress again, of course. The morning gown won't do. Now you must change into a walking dress, which is heavier, darker, and equipped with trimmings specifically designed to be ruined by London fog. You also don your bonnet, not a hat, darling. A bonnet tied tightly under the chin and angled just right to frame your face like a modest portrait. Heaven help you if the ribbons don't match your gloves. And the gloves? Still on. Always on. If the Queen herself dropped by unannounced, you'd be forgiven for unpolished shoes but not for bare knuckles. You step outside. The air is damp, faintly metallic. Horse dung, coal smoke, flowering hedges. A uniquely Victorian bouquet. You're not alone. The entire neighbourhood is strolling, like it's choreographed. Men tip their hats, women nod. Children walk in lines, holding hands like a small military unit of politeness. Dogs are permitted, but only the clean ones. The rest stay hidden. And now, the real challenge. The path etiquette. You walk on the left unless you're of higher status, in which case you glide along the centre, letting others part like the Red Sea. You don't stop. Stopping suggests idleness, loitering, possibly even flirtation. If you must pause, you pretend to examine a rose bush while keeping your head turned precisely 30 degrees from any nearby gentleman. Speaking of gentlemen, what if one approaches? What if, heaven forbid, he speaks? Here comes a tall figure now. Top hat, polished boots, walking cane that probably hasn't touched a sidewalk in its life. He recognizes you. You recognize him. He nods. You may nod back. If he lifts his hat, you curtsy slightly. But only slightly. A full curtsy implies intimacy. A micro curtsy says, "Yes, we've met, but no, I will not elope with you in front of Mrs. Pembroke and her Pekingese." If he speaks perhaps a mild comment on the weather, you may respond. Briefly, breezily, never pause your steps. Conversation must move with your feet. Stationary chatting is for radicals and Americans. You pass a group of other women. Now comes the real scrutiny. They glance at your dress, then your shoes, then your parasol. Their smiles say, "Lovely day." Their eyes say, "Is that last season's trim?" Victorian fashion was a constant, low-key battle. Trends shifted faster than train schedules. Trimmings, bustles, pleats, and sleeve widths all rotated in popularity with terrifying speed. One week it's all about fringed bodices. The next, if you have one, you're basically a street performer. A quirky tidbit here. Some women wore false hems, detachable fabric that collected mud and filth, which could be removed before entering the house. It saved laundry and dignity. Victorian life was 30% manners, 70% trying not to ruin your nice things. You continue on your route, careful not to overstep your pace. Walking too fast suggests eagerness. Walking too slowly implies melancholy. The correct rhythm is the pace of pleasant obligation. Eventually you reach a bench. You may sit, briefly. You unfold your parasol, yes, even in cloudy weather. It shields your skin from the sun's vulgar touch. Tanned skin is for labourers, and you're not about to let your face betray your class. You spot someone across the path, a distant cousin. You wave. Wrong. You've just violated a rule. A Victorian lady does not wave in public, she acknowledges. Maybe lifts a gloved hand a few degrees. You quickly pretend you are swatting a bee. An elderly gentleman approaches, limping slightly. You're expected to rise if he speaks. You do. He asks after your family. You answer politely. You do not ask after his. It would suggest undue familiarity. He offers a compliment. You nod. He moves on. You may sit again. You sigh. Not dramatically, of course, but just enough for your bodice to creak slightly. Even your bones are starting to resent the lace-trimmed tyranny. Now for the walk home. You retrace your steps. You nod to 2 more people. One of them you think you recognize. Possibly from a charity event. Possibly from a nightmare. You smile anyway. Back at the house, your boots are removed by a servant who will not look you in the eye. Your gloves are peeled off one finger at a time. Your bonnet is untied like you're defusing a bomb. And then, at last, you sit. Your ankles throb. Your cheeks feel stretched from all that polite smiling. But you made it. You walked the walk. You nodded, turned, dipped, stepped, glanced and curtsied, all without breaking a single rule. Well, except that one wave. But maybe no one noticed. You've barely recovered from the stress of the park promenade, and now it's time to prepare for nothing. Well, not nothing. You're expected to exist beautifully in a domestic setting for the rest of the afternoon, which, in Victorian terms, means look busy, stay quiet, don't eat anything that crunches. This is what's known as the idle hour, though of course, you're not actually idle. That would be unthinkable. Instead, you must engage in approved activities, ones that are feminine, elegant, and absolutely unproductive. You settle into the morning room again, now bathed in that soft, syrupy light that filters through lace curtains. You select your embroidery hoop. It contains a half-finished depiction of a forget-me-not, stitched in blue thread so pale it might as well be invisible. You don't actually want to finish it. Finishing things, after all, implies you had too much time. You thread the needle with deliberate precision. The needle is thin. Your gloves are off, finally, but your fingers are stiff from layers of glove etiquette. You begin stitching slowly, methodically. You don't prick yourself, though, let's be honest. The pain would be a welcome sensation, after all the social numbing. Across from you, another lady is painting a watercolour. It's of a bowl of fruit that looks oddly judgmental. She's not very good at it, but that doesn't matter. Talent isn't the point. The point is that she's occupied. In Victorian society, leisure wasn't for relaxing, it was for performing grace. A servant enters, carrying the post. Letters. A delightful, regulated form of communication. You receive one. The envelope is cream, the ink sepia, and the writing is neat, almost too neat. From your cousin Charlotte. You already know what it says. My dearest, it begins, I do hope you are well. Mama was most impressed with your gown last Thursday. That's code for Mama is still talking about how you wore violet when everyone else wore mauve. Social daggers in cursive. You write back, choosing your words as carefully as your hemline. Dearest Charlotte, I am so pleased Mama was struck by my gown. Do tell her I admired her pin so very much. Translation. Your mother's brooch looked like a Victorian paperweight, but sure, let's be civil. You fold the paper. Not in quarters, that's business. Not haphazardly, that's madness. A precise, elegant fold. You seal it with wax scented, naturally, and press your signet ring into the blob. Now it's a formal gesture, a performance in miniature. You return to your embroidery. Across the room, the fruit bowl painting is still being fruitless. Another woman is crocheting something so delicate it looks like the ghost of a scarf. A light cough, then another. This is how Victorian women signal they're about to speak. The conversation is whispered, meandering. Someone brings up Queen Victoria's latest appearance. Her Majesty's health seemed robust. Translation. She stood up without falling over. A triumph. Then someone mentions hushed tone, an opera singer. Gasps all around. Not because she was scandalous, but because she was paid to perform in public. Artistry is fine. Commerce? Terribly vulgar. You want to mention you once tried writing poetry. You don't. Too bohemian. Instead, you say, I enjoy reading Longfellow. Perfect. Foreign, but not French. Emotional, but not political. Safe. Here's a curious historical note. While men could study the sciences and classics openly, women were expected to read novels and write in diaries. A little journaling was fine. A lot? Cause for concern. There were even medical articles suggesting that too much imagination could damage a woman's womb. Historians still argue whether this was sincere belief or desperate excuse to keep women out of libraries. Meanwhile, you sip a glass of barley water, flavourless and lukewarm. It's supposed to be restorative. You suspect it was invented as a test of obedience. Time passes. Slowly. Someone mentions a local charity. You nod supportively. You once donated a knitted muff to an orphanage. It was never used. Apparently, orphans need food, not woolen accessories. Another letter arrives, this one for someone else. It's on pink paper. You glance discreetly. Pink usually means romantic, or worse, French. You don't ask, you just stitch a little faster. And then tragedy strikes. You drop your thimble. It rolls across the polished floor and stops near someone's boot. A gentleman's boot. Your face flushes. That's not supposed to happen. You do not retrieve the thimble yourself. You wait. You hope. He picks it up, silently, hands it to a nearby maid, who hands it to another maid, who finally delivers it back to you, as if transporting a crown jewel. No words, just a nod. That's the Victorian method. Solve the problem with maximum steps and minimum interaction. You smile faintly, resume stitching. The thimble sits on your finger again, heavier somehow. The idle hour concludes when someone stands up without announcement and quietly exits the room. That's the sign. You all follow, like geese, well-dressed, polite geese. Back in your room, you place your embroidery aside. You've stitched exactly 3 leaves. Each one took 12 minutes. Progress is not the point. Appearances are. Outside, the afternoon light begins to fade. Shadows stretch across the wallpaper. You realize the entire day has passed with barely a breeze of emotion, a whisper of purpose, and not a single genuine sentence spoken aloud. You were perfect. And somehow, you feel completely exhausted. The sun dips behind a thick curtain of soot-stained clouds, and lamps are lit with the soft hiss of gas or the flicker of oil. Evening is here again, and with it, a return to social civility, not that it ever left. But now the stakes are slightly different, slightly more performative. You're about to participate in the sacred tradition of the Victorian evening, gathering an occasion that may include card games, music, parlour tricks, and more small talk than your jaw is physically prepared for. But first, you must change clothes. Again. Yes, your walking dress won't do, nor will your tea gown. The evening gown is required now. A masterpiece of silk, satin, velvet, or a combination of all 3, it's designed not just to impress others, but to survive an entire night of being judged from every conceivable angle. If you're unmarried, your dress is lighter in colour, more delicate, and fluttery, basically wearable innocence. If you're married, you graduate to darker, richer hues like navy, emerald, or deep wine red. Black is still reserved for mourning, unless you're French or intentionally trying to start rumours. Necklines are lower, sleeves are shorter. Jewellery is subtle, unless you come from old money, in which case you're allowed to drape yourself in sapphires while claiming you threw something on. Your hair is styled higher now, pinned into elaborate coils and fastened with tortoiseshell combs, pearl-tipped pins, or, if you're feeling particularly daring, a jet brooch. Jet, by the way, was made from fossilized wood and became popular in mourning jewellery. Leave it to the Victorians to find a way to make grief into fashion. You descend the staircase slowly, not because you're trying to be grand, but because your shoes are little leather traps, and your corset still refuses to yield to gravity or digestion. As you enter the drawing room, the guests begin to trickle in. It's a smaller affair tonight, just 10 or 12 people, all familiar, all rigid. A soft clink of glasses, the scent of cologne, and the sound of a poorly tuned pianoforte form the atmosphere. A gentleman greets you with a bow. You curtsy. A lady approaches and compliments your fan. You return the favour, commenting on the beading of her sleeves. This exchange of fabric flattery is essential. It builds social capital. The richer the compliment, the more generous the gossip you'll receive in return. Someone proposes a round of whist. You don't particularly enjoy whist, but you smile and accept. Declining would raise eyebrows. Participation is expected, even if the rules are unclear and the stakes are non-existent. The goal isn't winning. It's showing off how gracefully you lose. The deck is dealt. Cards shuffle like secrets. You glance at your hand. Useless. You pretend to study them thoughtfully anyway. Your partner, an older gentleman with a mustache that resembles a pastry, makes the first move. Here's the key to Victorian parlour games. They are never just games. Every choice you make, every glance across the table, every accidental brush of a sleeve carries meaning. You don't play cards. You perform cards. You lose, of course. But charmingly, with a laugh that barely escapes your throat, you say, "Oh dear," and smile with the restraint of someone trying not to hiccup during a eulogy. Everyone is pleased, especially the winner, who gets the satisfaction of victory without the threat of competition. Next, it's time for music. The pianoforte beckons. A young lady is gently coerced into playing. She protests modestly, falsely then glides to the bench and performs a gentle piece by Chopin. It's lovely. She barely misses a note. Everyone pretends not to be impressed. Then someone suggests you sing. You demur. You must. 3 times. That's the rule. I couldn't possibly. Oh no, I haven't the voice tonight. Well, only if everyone insists. They do. And so, you sing. A simple ballad. Perhaps Home, Sweet Home, or something equally tear-inducing. You are careful not to sing too well. Too much talent is dangerous. Artistry should inspire, not challenge. When you finish, there is polite applause. Not enthusiastic. That would be vulgar. But enough to acknowledge you did something brave without rocking the metaphorical boat. The gentleman with the pastry moustache says, "You have a delightful tone." You nod demurely and mutter, "You're too kind." He is. He's also slightly deaf. As the evening continues, a few more games are suggested. Charades. A word game involving biblical names and animals. A round of consequences, where everyone writes a sentence and folds the paper, resulting in a nonsensical story. It's meant to be hilarious. It isn't. But everyone laughs anyway. A fringe tidbit here. Parlour games were one of the few areas where Victorians let themselves get silly, but only within strict boundaries. You could mime being a cat, but not a scandalous actress. You could draw a sheep, but not a bishop with exaggerated features. The line between mirth and moral collapse was about 3 inches wide. The clock chimes 10. Time to wrap up. 10 o'clock isn't late. But remember, you've been performing since morning. You've smiled, nodded, sipped, stitched, walked, and now sung without once letting the seams of your composure slip. Guests begin to leave. You say your goodbyes. You thank the host. You compliment the tea. You nod at the pianist. You step out into the night. The sky is still, the air cool. The stars are out, faint and filtered through coal smoke. You walk slowly back to your room, your steps light but your limbs heavy. At last you remove your gloves. You untee your corset. You breathe. It's not just the end of an evening. It's the temporary collapse of a performance that's been running since dawn. You survived the parlour, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. Morning again. The gas lights are out, the fire is cold ash, and your bones ache in places you didn't know could ache. You wake not to an alarm, but to a soft knock. 3 taps from a maid who won't enter until you've said, yes. Even that is a rule. You reply, and she enters silently, bearing a pitcher of lukewarm water, a folded towel, and that solemn expression that says, another day of corsets and compromise awaits. But today, your role is slightly different. You're not hosting, and you're not receiving callers. Today, you are the caller. That's right, it's visiting day. The structured chaos of Victorian social networking. And while you may think calling on friends sounds casual and cozy, in this era, it's closer to chess with bonnets. One wrong move, and your name vanishes from everyone's calling card tray. Your maid helps you dress. A day dress this time, modest but refined. Something in grey or lavender, with just enough embellishment to say tasteful, but not so much as to scream trying too hard. No jewellery, except perhaps a small brooch or locket. You are to be seen, not sparkled. Gloves? Of course. Parasol? Optional but recommended both for sun and for social signalling. You don't actually use it to block the sun. You carry it, like a silent herald announcing, I've come to impress, not sweat. Now, the main weapon of the day, your calling cards. Neatly printed, slightly embossed, carried in a silver case or a fine card wallet. You have a stack, ready to deploy like tiny Victorian business missiles. Each card bears your name, possibly prefaced with Miss or Mrs., depending on your marital status, and perhaps a subtle flourish like a vine or leaf motif, but never anything too loud. Remember, The goal is to imply wealth without confirming it. You step into your carriage if you have one, or walk if you're middle class, but pretending not to be. Calling begins no earlier than 3 p.m. and ends strictly by 5 o'clock. Arrive early and you seem overeager. Arrive late and you risk catching the hostess in her hairnet. Your first stop, Lady Wilton. She's important, not because she's kind or interesting, but because everyone else calls on her. You approach her townhouse, heart fluttering, gloves adjusted. The butler answers. He eyes your card. He does not smile. That's not his job. He takes your card on a silver tray. If Lady Wilton is at home to you, a phrase that means she's willing to be seen, you will be led inside to the drawing room for a strictly timed 15-minute visit. If she is not at home, despite clearly being upstairs eating strawberries, the butler returns and tells you so. Politely, you leave another card anyway. That's the dance. Today, you're lucky. She's at home. You're ushered into a room filled with stiff chairs, large plants, and smaller women. The air smells faintly of lilac and upholstery. You curtsy. She nods. A few pleasantries are exchanged. The weather is admired. You mention how charming the street is this time of year. She says something about azaleas. No one is listening. Everyone is watching your hands, your shoes, your tone. A footman appears like a ghost and signals your time is up. 15 minutes. Not 16. Not 14. This isn't a visit. It's an audition. You curtsy again. The butler sees you out. You return to the street and consult your mental list. 4 more calls to make. No one expects long conversations. The purpose of these visits isn't depth. It's presence. You show up. You leave your card. You exist, politely, in their world. A curious historical footnote. Women often had separate calling cards for mourning, edged in black. You could also fold a corner to indicate the card was delivered in person. A folded top left corner might say, "I visited." A folded bottom right could mean, "Congratulations," or "Condolences." Historians still argue whether it depended on which side of the Thames you lived on. You make your next 2 calls. One results in a brief visit. One does not. That's acceptable. No one's feelings are hurt because feelings are never admitted to exist. But at the 4th house, there's a problem. Another guest is already there. This is tricky. Victorians didn't do drop-ins. Calling was calculated, not spontaneous. You sit in the drawing room beside a woman you barely know, discussing tulips while mentally calculating whether she outranks you socially and whether she'll gossip about your slightly mismatched glove buttons. After 10 minutes, she leaves. You relax. The hostess begins to smile again. Apparently, you were the guest she actually wanted to see. Small victories. You make your final visit just before the clock strikes 5. The lady is not at home. You leave your card anyway. You walk back, legs sore, cheeks aching, gloves faintly damp. You've said almost nothing of consequence. And yet somehow, you're exhausted. That's the paradox of Victorian society. The less you say, the more you reveal. And every visit, every card, every handshake and nod forms a lattice of unspoken status that decides everything. Back in your room, you remove your gloves, count your cards, and wonder which invitations this effort will earn or which doors it might quietly close. You're back inside now, safe from the judgmental streets and the sharper-than-they-look tulip conversations. But don't relax just yet. You're not done navigating treachery. You're about to face something far more perilous than misusing a dessert fork. Stairs. Yes. Public stairs. Specifically, walking upstairs in view of others, an act so loaded with social danger, the Victorians may as well have laid traps at each landing. It begins in the theatre, the opera, or any formal event where ascending a staircase is required. And it's not just about getting from one level to another. It's about how your body moves in layers of petticoats while someone watches from below. You're expected to glide. Not clomp, not shuffle, and certainly not trip. Your foot must rise just enough to suggest grace, not exertion. If anyone sees your ankle, and God forbid, more it could cause whispers, blushes, even a scandal. Hence the invention of the stair lift, not the mechanical kind we know today, but a trick of posture and skirt control. You lightly hold your skirts just above the floor, not above the ankle, never above the ankle. allowing you to float upward, as if carried by propriety alone. Victorian architects didn't help. Staircases in fashionable homes were often steep, narrow, and centre stage, placed directly in the entryway, like some sort of social gauntlet. Men were expected to walk behind women on stairs, not out of gallantry, but to shield their view, or more precisely, to control it. A little-known detail. It was considered inappropriate, even indecent for a man to observe a woman from behind while she climbed, especially if her dress had any sway. A glimpse of a boot heel, a flash of petticoat lace. It was all too suggestive. Historians still argue whether these anxieties stemmed from religious modesty or were just part of the endless Victorian fear of bodies behaving like, well, bodies. And then there's the descent. Possibly worse than the climb. Descending stairs in public demanded a new level of poise. You had to keep your chin level, your back straight, your eyes soft, and your feet precise. A single stumble, and your reputation followed you right down to the marble floor. For formal occasions, you were often guided by a male companion. But not just anyone. A brother or father was fine. A suitor? Scandalous and less engaged. A stranger? Never. You recall an awkward moment last season when Miss Daring allowed the wrong gentleman to offer his arm while descending the steps of the Bath Assembly Rooms. The resulting gossip travelled faster than the Morning Post. She was promptly sent to her aunt's estate in Devon for 6 months of rest. Now imagine being a servant navigating stairs, carrying a tray, in silence, in shadow, invisible, but always under scrutiny. One slipped dish, one broken teacup on a carpeted stair, and their future would unravel faster than a dropped spool of lace. Even children weren't spared. Proper young ladies were taught stair posture, before they learned long division, knees close, skirt lifted with exactly 3 fingers, no swinging arms, no giggles. Jiggles, you see, had stair-specific application. You recall learning this in childhood, balancing a book on your head, while stepping down one tread at a time. Your governess hovering like a hawk, whispering, heel toe, no clunking. She would have rather heard you curse than clunk. Let's pause for a quirky aside. Queen Victoria herself had very strong opinions about staircases. She reportedly favoured shallow steps and long landings, and had them installed in several royal residences. Some speculate this was due to her growing size in later years. Others say it was to prevent her daughters from being ogled. Either way, the Queen's stairs had rules of their own. One did not rush up them. One certainly didn't joke on them. And under no circumstances did one pass Her Majesty on them. Back in your world, the staircase in your host's home is wide and ornate mahogany banisters, thick carpeting, and just enough of an incline to make you sweat. There's a mirror at the top, placed there, you suspect, not for vanity but surveillance. You begin your climb. 1 foot, then the other. Light grip on the skirt. Chin lifted. You feel eyes. You don't look down. That would suggest awareness. You don't look up either. That would imply ambition. Halfway up, a man appears at the bottom. You feel the heat rise to your cheeks. Is he watching? Is he allowed to watch? You slow your pace, pretending not to notice. The hem of your gown sways. You adjust. You reach the landing. Victory. Now for the descent. You turn. You glance ahead. Not at the man, of course, but past him, into the middle distance. You begin your slow return, letting your foot find each step with the caution of someone navigating polite quicksand. At the bottom, you reach the marble floor with a silent step. You smile at no one in particular. Your heart is racing. Your ankles are trembling. But on the outside, you're as calm as a Sunday hymn. You've conquered the stairs, and no one saw your ankles. You've survived dinner, tea, staircases, and society itself. But now, you're about to face a force that no etiquette guide fully prepares you for. Victorian childhood. No, not your own. That, too, was likely a blur of starched pinafores, braided hair, and being told to sit still for paintings that took hours. But today, you're visiting a household that has children. And that means one of 2 things. They are either being presented as trophies, or completely hidden from view. You enter the morning room and hear them before you see them. A faint shuffling, a soft thud, A giggle quickly hushed. Victorian children were meant to be seen but only when summoned. Otherwise, they lived in a world of rigid rules and relentless surveillance. Much like you, only smaller, louder, and more prone to dropping jam on expensive furniture. A governess appears. She is angular, starched, and always slightly out of breath. She gives you the nod. The children are ready. Nod. They are allowed downstairs now. In comes a girl of perhaps 8. Hair brushed into severe perfection, white frock, pale stockings. A boy follows, about 10, in a miniature sailor suit, because nothing says future empire builder like cosplay for naval duty. They stand perfectly still, lips pressed together in the universal child expression for get through this and you might earn jam later. You smile gently, because it's expected. They nod in return, because speaking without permission would lead to consequence. You attempt small talk. Do you enjoy your lessons? You ask the girl. She pauses, thinks, then says, "Yes, miss." A safe answer. They don't sit. Children do not sit in the presence of adults unless explicitly told to, and even then, only on the edge of a chair, as if comfort were a sin. The boy stares at the fireplace. The girl stares at the floor. It's unsettling. But that's Victorian childhood in a nutshell. A series of emotional corsets. Discipline was the goal, obedience the currency, and imagination? That was permitted only between embroidery lessons and Bible readings. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Victorian children, especially upper and middle class ones, were raised under the principle of moral instruction. They were believed to be born wild and selfish, and the only way to civilize them was through rigid structure, clear hierarchy, and, yes, the occasional correction. Corporal punishment wasn't just tolerated, it was advised in many parenting manuals. A well-behaved child was seen as a sign of divine favor. A rowdy one? A sign of parental failure, or worse, poor breeding. Historians still argue whether this harsh upbringing created emotionally repressed adults or just very polite ones with vivid inner lives. But not all was discipline. There were toys, rocking horses, tin soldiers, dollhouses, so elaborate they could be considered real estate. Picture books with pastel-colored illustrations of woodland creatures speaking in perfect grammar. But even play had structure. You may recall hearing about the idea that idle hands are the devil's workshop. In Victorian England, this was applied liberally to children. A child caught staring out a window was immediately handed a needlepoint project or a Latin translation exercise. But here's a quirky little tidbit. Children's literature boomed in the Victorian era. Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was considered radical because it allowed a child protagonist to question authority and logic. It wasn't just fantasy, it was rebellion, disguised as Tea Party nonsense. Some critics hated it, others adored it. A few probably thought it would turn children into anarchists. It didn't, but it did make them curious. Back in the drawing room, the girl is now allowed to show you her sampler, a bit of embroidery she's been stitching all year. The stitches are neat, the pattern dull. "God bless our home," it says, surrounded by leaves and geometric roses. You say, "It's beautiful," because that's the rule. She says, "Thank you," without looking up. The boy is invited to recite a poem. He does. His voice is flat, but correct. Every word pronounced as if each had been weighed, dusted, and inspected before leaving his mouth. You clap politely. He nods once. Then, with the quiet nod of the governess, they retreat back upstairs, to lessons, to posture drills, to the echoing world of supervised childhood. You exhale. Victorian society treated children less as people and more as projects. Tiny adults in training expected to memorize etiquette before their multiplication tables. Sentimentality was allowed in portraits, but not in discipline. There were exceptions, of course. Mothers who doted, fathers who ruffled hair when no one was looking. But such displays were kept behind closed doors, wrapped in propriety like everything else. You remember your own childhood lessons? Balancing a book on your head, walking the length of the parlor without swinging your arms, practicing graceful stillness, which is exactly as fun as it sounds. Children were not allowed to fidget, not to question, not to speak unless prompted, and above all, not to embarrass anyone. Now, As you sit once more in the quiet of the afternoon, you realize the oddest truth of all. No one ever told these children that growing up meant more freedom, because, well, it didn't. Growing up just meant a new script, a longer one, with stiffer costumes, and fewer jam privileges. You've endured polite drawing rooms, crisp handkerchiefs, and children who speak like haunted dolls. You deserve a moment of mischief. Or at least, flirtation. Yes, dear listener, it's time to talk about one of the most thrilling and perilous games in Victorian society, flirting. But don't expect hearts and roses. This isn't modern courtship. There's no texting, no candlelit dinners, no you up at 11 p.m. There is, however, a fan, and a parasol, and an entire secret language built on the movement of objects. You find yourself in the company of others in a conservatory, a gathering arranged for the express purpose of mingling in polite proximity to potential partners. There are palms in large urns, the scent of orange blossoms, and just enough humidity to fog a monocle. You're seated, of course, in a way that ensures no one is ever alone. An unmarried woman may not be left unsupervised, especially not with a man who isn't her brother, cousin, or about to propose. Chaperones linger, eyes sharper than needles, ears tuned to detect anything as scandalous as a prolonged gaze. And yet, the flirting begins. Not with words. No, that would be far too obvious. It starts with a glance held half a second too long, then a fan fluttering open, a drop of the handkerchief, a brush of a gloved finger. These are not accidents. These are signals. Let's decode them, shall we? A closed fan resting on the cheek. I like you. Fan drawn slowly across the eyes. We're being watched. Be careful. Snapping the fan shut sharply. Leave me immediately, you incompetent goose. Historians still argue whether these signals were universally understood or mostly wishful thinking on the part of etiquette, authors desperate to sell another volume. Still, it's a charming idea. A whole romance played out in silence, a ballet of subtle movements and coded gestures. But the fan is only the beginning. There's also the parasol. On a stroll, if you tilt it just so, it can shield you from the gaze of the chaperone and offer a moment of whispered conspiracy to the gentleman walking beside you. A low voice, a comment on the weather, a quote from Byron, and suddenly the entire tone of the day has shifted. You recall a walk just like this one last summer. You in pale lilac, he in grey with a navy cravat. You walked side by side, your gloved hands almost, but never quite touching. At one point he brushed against your sleeve, and you both looked straight ahead, as if nothing had happened. It was the most exciting 40 minutes of your life. Flirting in the Victorian world wasn't just difficult, it was an art. You couldn't say what you felt. You couldn't even admit you felt anything. So you learned to speak in looks, and silences, and slightly too slow tea refills. Now, someone at this conservatory gathering is approaching. He's not striking, not dashing, but he is appropriate. His waistcoat is buttoned properly, his shoes are shined, his cravat is ironed to perfection. In other words, he's practically screaming, eligible. He asks, softly, if you'd care for lemonade. You nod. He fetches it, he returns. He hands it to you with his gloved fingers grazing yours just slightly. You thank him. He nods. That's it. That's the whole interaction. And yet, you'll remember it for days. Because in this world, restraint is romance. Now here's a curious little fact. In certain upper-class households, matchmaking was a group activity. Entire families would scrutinize interactions at dinner parties and relay their findings the next morning, like intelligence briefings. Did you see how he offered her the last of the lemon tart? Indeed. And she accepted it with her right hand. Bold. Some flirtations took place over months. A shared hymn book at church. A mutual admiration for begonias. A moment in a corridor that would make a Bronte heroine blush. If you were lucky, it blossomed into a courtship. If you were unlucky, someone misinterpreted your fan flutter, and suddenly you're betrothed to someone with alarming teeth and 3 titles but no conversation. You glance across the room now and catch someone's eye. A second too long. You look away. He does not. The game is afoot. A chaperone shifts in her chair. A maid adjusts the teacups. You raise your fan slowly, the lace brushing your cheek. Did he understand? Did he catch the message? Hard to say. But that's the point. Flirting in this world wasn't about instant gratification. It was about delayed certainty, about building tension inside boundaries so tight they squeaked. You rise. Your parasol waits. So does the pathway winding into the garden. You won't take his arm. You can't. But maybe if the chaperone turns, he'll offer you a flower. And maybe you'll accept it with a smile that means yes, and a nod that means soon, and a silence that says everything. You fluttered your fan, tilted your parasol, and nodded yourself nearly into a courtship, all without once saying, "I like you." And now you feel a tickle in your throat, a fatigue in your limbs. You're unwell. Or are you? Because in Victorian England, being sick wasn't just a matter of health. It was a matter of character. You sit in your room, a light shawl over your shoulders, sipping a tepid cup of elderflower tea. The doctor has been summoned not because your symptoms are dire, but because your complexion was described as wan. That's all it takes. Illness in this era is theatrical, moral, and highly gendered. For women, to be frail is to be feminine, delicate, ethereal, like a water lily about to faint. Unless, of course, it's the wrong sort of sick. Then you're just unhygienic. The maid brings a second shawl. She lights a fire, adds a wedge of lemon to your tea, and whispers that the doctor will arrive shortly. She doesn't ask how you feel. That would be forward. Instead, she says, "You look quite pale today, miss," which is Victorian for yikes. Now, here's where it gets complicated. If you were male and sickly, you might be pitied, but only if you were wealthy or a poet. If you were poor, your illness was likely blamed on drink, sin, or weak moral fibre. For women, the line between tragically beautiful and disgracefully bedridden was razor thin. You glance at yourself in the mirror. Pale, yes, but no unsightly spots, no coughing blood. Good, you don't want that kind of sick. The right illness is subtle, consumptive, romantic, the sort of ailment that makes you look good in candlelight and earns concerned glances from eligible men. A mainstream historical fact, tuberculosis, then called consumption, was oddly fashionable. It made you pale, thin, and glassy-eyed. Artists painted consumptives with reverence. Poets wrote about them like saints. There were even dresses tailored to accentuate the sickly silhouette. Historians still debate whether Victorian society aestheticized illness to cope with fear, or simply because it was too obsessed with appearances to look away. The doctor arrives. He's wearing a frock coat and a top hat, and carries a small black bag full of terrifying objects. He does not make eye contact at first, that would be improper. He listens to your breathing. He presses a hand to your wrist. He asks if you've been feeling out of sorts. You say, "Just a touch of fatigue." He nods gravely, prescribes rest, possibly some cod liver oil, maybe a tonic with quinine, or opium, or both. There's no real diagnosis, just a general declaration that your nerves are frayed and your vital energy is low. He leaves. You're now officially indisposed. Afti. And being indisposed is, oddly, a kind of social leverage. You may skip gatherings. You may refuse visitors. You may take tea in bed. You may gaze sadly out windows while people say, "Poor thing." It's not exactly restful, but it is respectable. But beware, the wrong kind of sick can ruin you. Let's say, for instance, you suffer from hysteria, the Victorian catch-all for any behaviour deemed inconvenient or confusing in a woman. Cry too easily? Hysteria. Laugh too much? Hysteria. Want to vote? Definitely hysteria. Treatments varied wildly, from cold baths and dietary restrictions to electrotherapy, and famously the invention of the hysterical paroxysm device. We'll just glide past that one for bedtime purposes. And what of the working classes? They didn't have the luxury of delicate sickness. If you were poor and sick, you worked anyway, or you were carted off to a charity hospital and buried in a mass grave. No fans, no lasse pillows, no elderflower tea. Even among the wealthy, suspicion crept in. Illness could be faked, or exaggerated, or inconvenient. You once overheard a matron say, "Lady Trevor's feigned a cough for 3 weeks, just to avoid hosting the Chattertons." You nodded solemnly at the time. But secretly, you respected her. A fringe tidbit here. Some Victorian women kept invalid diaries, beautifully bound journals, where they documented their headaches, fainting spells, and digestive upsets. Part medical log, part social alibi, part inner monologue. Some of them read like quiet protest novels. Dear Diary, I felt strange again today. Mr. Hemsworth arrived with flowers. I did not ring the bell. Back in your room, the maid draws the curtains. The light softens. You sip your tea again. Someone has sent a note inquiring after your health. It's from him, the gentleman with the navy cravat. You smile, just a little. Being ill, it seems, has its charms. But don't overdo it. Stay ill too long. And the whispers start. Is she really unwell? Is it her nerves? Is it contagious? So you plot your recovery. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll take the air in the garden. Sit in the shade. Let your pale cheeks catch the breeze. You'll bring a shawl, just in case. Because in this world, even your cough is choreographed. Today, your tea is slightly stronger. Your complexion, slightly brighter. Your illness, though never formally named, is deemed lifting. Congratulations. You are no longer at death's dainty doorstep. But before you return to the full rigours of Victorian social performance, there is one more ceremonial obstacle to navigate. Mourning. Yes, someone has died. Not close enough to send you spiralling into despair, but just near enough to trigger an entire overhaul of your wardrobe, your schedule, your conversation topics, and somehow your hairpins. In Victorian society, mourning wasn't an emotion, it was an institution. Grief came with guidelines, timetables, and wardrobe charts. If you cried without the appropriate veil, you were being melodramatic. If you wore colour too soon, you were heartless. It was, as ever, a balancing act. Sad, but fashionably so. This time, it's your mother's second cousin. Technically a distant relation, but socially relevant enough to activate half mourning, which means no black crepe, but also no lilac, and absolutely no dancing, for at least 3 weeks. Your wardrobe reacts accordingly. The lavender gown is folded away. Your day dress now includes somber grey trim. Your gloves are black, not glossy satin, but dull cotton. Your jewellery box is ransacked for jet fossilized coal, made into beads, brooches, lockets, not for sparkle, but for solemnity. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Queen Victoria, after Prince Albert's death in 1861, remained in mourning for 40 years. Her grief reshaped the customs of an empire. What was once a personal loss became a national aesthetic. Mourning houses, mourning bonnets, mourning stationery, even mourning etiquette books. Historians still debate whether this was an expression of genuine love or a deliberate cultivation of royal mystique. Either way, it stuck. You receive a note black border, heavy cardstock. It is not an invitation, it is a summons. A funeral, of course, midweek, mid-morning, and yes, you must attend. The church is cold, stone arches loom. Everyone is dressed like matching chess pieces, black, grey, maybe one very cautious navy. You sit quietly, gloved hands folded in your lap. The air smells of lilies and damp wool. You do not weep. You do not sniffle. You inhale delicately and lower your eyes. Mourning is not a display of sorrow, it's the containment of it. Someone coughs behind you. Someone else sighs. These are the only sounds allowed. The priest speaks in soft Latin phrases. You do not understand them. You do not need to. You bow your head at the correct moments. Afterward there is a procession. And then, of course, a morning luncheon. Chicken in white sauce. A dry biscuit. Weak tea. The conversation is spare, but not silent. He was always so punctual, someone says. She did love her roses, says another. No one says, I miss them. A curious fringe detail. The Victorians hired professional mourners. If your family couldn't be bothered, or if you were unpopular in life, you could still have a crowd at your funeral. They'd weep, sob, and deliver dramatic wails on cue. It was considered both comforting and good optics. You do not hire mourners today. You mourn quietly, elegantly, by wearing your grief like a subtle badge, and by altering your behavior in very specific, socially required ways. You decline 2 invitations, one to a musicale, one to a garden supper. You send polite notes explaining your current status. In mourning. No elaboration needed. You no longer play the piano. You speak less. You take your walks later in the day, away from the usual strolling crowd. You wear your veil in public, though it smothers your breath and flattens your curls. You are mourning, and mourning has phases. First morning, all black, veil, silence. No jewelry, no visitors. 6 months to 2 years, depending on the closeness of the deceased and the stubbornness of the griever. Second morning, fabrics lighten slightly. Bombazine and crepe give way to silk. Jewelry is allowed, but only jet, onyx, or hairwork. Yes, jewelry made from the hair of the dead. You may now receive visits. But new music, new dancing, new parasol twirls. Half mourning, enter grey, lavender, mauve. Conversation returns. Social appearances resume, but only the quieter ones. No theatre, no balls. You may laugh. Softly, once. And when it's all over, you shed the black. Quietly. You store the veil. Fold the gloves. Press the jet beads into tissue paper. And you pretend that grief, now dressed in cream again, has vanished. But it hasn't, because in Victorian England, mourning might end on your calendar, but it clings in your habits, your reputation, and the colour palette of your soul. Back in your room, you gaze at your reflection. Pale grey sleeves, a tiny brooch with the deceased's initials. You nod once. You are no longer in mourning. You are now merely sombre, and ready to re-enter the world. Mourning has lifted, and with it, the shadow of soft greys and tighter gloves. But don't exhale too deeply, you're being summoned. Not for a funeral this time, but something equally high stakes, if more suffocating in a different sense, a matchmaking dinner. Yes. You, carefully coiffed, precisely perfumed, and recently freed from half mourning, have become a candidate. The table is set, the guest list curated, and someone, probably an aunt, is determined to marry you off like an unsold porcelain vase. The venue, a country estate. The dining room is long and candlelit, with tapestries that never quite stop rustling. You sit between a man who smells like cedar polish and another who won't stop coughing gently into his napkin. One of them is a second son. The other owns land. But the land is swampy. You've done the mental math. And across from you, him. Not a stranger exactly. You've met at church. You've passed each other during garden walks. He once handed you a fan you hadn't dropped. And tonight, he's been placed exactly opposite you. A perfect triangulation of eye contact and roast pheasant. The conversation begins. And of course, it's not about you. That would be too direct. No, matchmaking dinners are indirect dances. A performance conducted via commentary on everything else. Did you see the Queen's new portrait? Someone asks. She looks quite resolute, replies the gentleman beside you, clearly hedging his opinion. You sip your wine and murmur, perhaps a bit over-retouched. The room goes silent for half a beat. Then laughter. You've passed the test. You've shown wit and restraint, flirtation, Victorian style. The meal proceeds with agonizing delicacy. Every course is another opportunity to prove your worth not just as a dinner guest, but as a future partner in property consolidation. You smile. You compliment the fish. You express a mild, neutral opinion on Byron. You do not mention Mary Wollstonecraft. That would be dangerous. A mainstream historical fact. In the Victorian upper classes, marriage was rarely about love. It was about land, dowries, bloodlines. Your affections were secondary to your acreage. Your charm was only as valuable as your family's ledger. Even your health could be assessed like livestock. Historians still argue whether Victorian women were pawns in dynastic games or quiet agents of subversion who learned to play the system better than the men. The answer, probably, is both. Back at the table, dessert arrives. Not a modern tiramisu or tart. No. You're facing a floating island, a cloud of meringue on crème anglaise that dares you to eat it gracefully, while maintaining eye contact with your presumed suitor. You succeed. He compliments your poise. You thank him with a tilt of the head not too forward. Forwardness can end a courtship faster than a scandal. After dinner, the party moves to the drawing room. Cards? Number? Too competitive. Music? Likely. You're asked to sing. Again. You demur, then accept. Again. Your song is sweet, slightly sad. A ballad that implies longing without specifics. The room quiets. He watches you with polite interest and perhaps something more. After the final note, you rejoin the circle of chairs and sofas arranged like a polite fortress around the fireplace. The gentleman speaks to you. Of books. Of country walks. Of the ridiculous weather. Always the weather. You ask a question, and he smiles. But before he can answer, an aunt appears beside you. Walk with him, she says softly. It's not a suggestion. You take his arm and move into the corridor, the air cool and filled with the distant scent of lilies and tobacco. You stroll in silence at first. The floor creaks beneath the carpet. He mentions the new conservatory at his estate. You nod, murmuring something about hydrangeas. He says, "I've always admired quiet strength." You glance sideways. Is that a compliment? A proposal in slow motion? A well-practiced line? You answer, "It's often the only kind of strength we're allowed." His brow lifts, then softens. Perhaps that should change. You turn toward the window. The moon is out, the night quiet. But nothing is said, not directly. That would be indecorous. Instead, he offers his arm again. You accept. You return to the drawing room, where the aunt is waiting. She smiles. A fringe tidbit here. Engagements were often brokered, not with a single proposal, but through a series of hints, permissions, and understandings. Families discussed intentions before anyone involved had said the word love aloud. Some engagements were announced in the papers before the couple had agreed privately. Others ended when one party simply stopped writing. You're not engaged, not yet. But the way the candles flicker and the aunt is now whispering to her friend, you're on the list. Back in your room, you remove your gloves slowly, one finger at a time. You sit at your vanity, hair half pinned, face thoughtful. You don't dislike him, but you wonder if he sees you, or just the perfectly stitched version of you, embroidery and posture and scripted responses. You're not sure yet. But in this world, uncertainty is luxury. Most women don't get the chance to hesitate. You blow out the candle. The darkness sighs. The dinner was successful. You may now be in play. It's the next morning, and the household is buzzing. The matchmaking dinner has achieved its purpose. Or at least, that's what the aunts are whispering between mouthfuls of toast and marmalade. You, however, aren't quite ready to surrender yourself to marital paperwork. There's one more battlefield to master. Social climbing. No, it's not as dramatic as scaling the Alps, but it's equally treacherous and slipperier, because in Victorian society, everyone pretends status is fixed, while desperately maneuvering behind closed doors to raise it. You are currently genteel, but not grand. Your father has land, but not a title. Your dowry is respectable, not eye-watering. Your gowns are lovely, but last season, which means you must do what every savvy Victorian woman learns early. Climb without being seen climbing. It begins with calling cards. Yes, again. But this time, they're not for cousins or widows. You're targeting gatekeepers, those families perched just above you, close enough to touch, but guarded by years of selective breeding and ruthless dinner party politics. You carefully write out a list. The Ashbrooks, the Denhams, Lady Mortlake. Each one holds social keys. You send your cards with a discreet note, regretfully unable to attend the musicale last Tuesday. Do let me know of your next gathering. It's polite. It's gentle. It's a socially sharpened elbow nudge. And if the card is returned with an embossed invitation, you've gained a rung. Next, conversation. You read the latest illustrated London news cover to cover, not because you care about Prussian canal systems, but because Lady Mortlake does. You memorize a few art critiques. You learn to say, interesting, in 3 tones: enthusiastic, cautiously supportive, and faintly superior. It's a skill, a mainstream historical fact. In Victorian high society, Social movement didn't require talent. It required proximity. Appear in enough drawing rooms, and your name starts to matter. That's why women painted, hosted recitals, published poetry under pseudonyms. All elegant forms of branding. You practice your piano. Not to impress, heaven forbid you seem to be trying, but to appear accomplished. You revise your embroidery style. Fewer samplers, more tasteful botanical renderings. Something that whispers, I could have gone to art school, if that were allowed. You also drop names delicately. Oh yes, I heard Lord Halverston had taken ill. His niece mentioned it at tea last week. Did you actually speak to the niece? Number. But you heard her mention it in passing while choosing biscuits. Close enough. You also begin a subtle campaign of visual repositioning. A new hair ribbon here, a quieter brooch there. You even have your shoes re-heeled, not because they were worn, but because someone might see the scuffs. And then your first invitation arrives. Not to a ball. That would be too sudden. No, this is a luncheon. 24 ladies, all of them with sharper eyes than the Queen's advisors. You attend in soft blue silk. Your gloves are perfect. Your parasol is practically humming with nervous anticipation. You enter the room. Silence, then smiles. You have arrived. Now comes the real game. You don't sit too quickly. That would suggest eagerness. You don't speak first. That would be presumptuous. You wait for the hostess to greet you. She does. Barely. You say something light about the weather. She nods. Someone else chuckles. You're being tested. You pass. The conversation drifts. You add one comment about a recent art exhibition, another about Lord Russell's speech. A joke, softly delivered, about the excessive use of the word melancholy in modern poetry. They laugh. You sip your tea. A fringe tidbit. Victorian women used their needlework and tea habits like business cards. The design of your tea tray, the neatness of your stitch, the weight of your spoon, these were social cues, quiet ways to signal education, breeding, and ambition. By the end of the luncheon, you've made 3 allies, 1 rival, and 2 older ladies are whispering about your posture, which is a win. You return home. Your aunt asks how it went. You shrug, modestly. Quite pleasant, but inside, you're triumphant. The next week, a second invitation arrives. A garden party. Then, a dinner. You're being noticed. Not for scandal, not for beauty, but for placement. You are precisely the right sort of interesting. And perhaps most importantly, you understand the central rule of Victorian social climbing. Pretend you're not climbing. Pretend you were always here. That your dress was never borrowed. That your manners were inherited, not studied. That you simply belong. And eventually, you will. Back in your room, you hang your silk gown with care. You brush your hair slowly. You sit at your vanity and stare into the mirror. You see a woman who understands the system, who has mastered the art of the polite ambition. You smile, and you keep climbing. You've climbed quietly, carefully, and you're standing at a new social elevation. Congratulations. But before you get too comfortable, it's time for a surprise twist in your Victorian saga. You're being judged by animals. Not metaphorically, though, that's always true, but literally. Today you're paying a call to a household where dogs are pampered like royalty, cats are mysteriously absent. They always are. And the family's horse has a better pedigree than most people. Yes, in Victorian society, animal etiquette was a thing, and failing to observe it could undo weeks, months of social progress. The host greets you at the door and offers his hand. The dog, an overweight pug named Horace, barks once, then curls up beside the umbrella stand. You smile. That's your first test. You must acknowledge the animal, but only once. Too much attention, and you seem frivolous. Too little, and you're heartless. You kneel. Extend a gloved hand. What a fine gentleman, you say, without irony. The host beams. You're in. A mainstream historical fact. The Victorians adored their pets, but not in the cuddly kiss-on-the-nose way we do today. No. Theirs was a structured affection. Dogs were indicators of status. Breeds mattered. Manners mattered more. A well-behaved spaniel could earn its own appraise. A misbehaving terrier? Social suicide. You walk through the parlor. On the wall, an oil painting of the family setter, framed, larger than life, positioned above the portrait of Great Aunt Minerva. You nod at it respectfully. You are learning. Now comes the tea service. The footman brings out the silver. The hostess remarks that her new Persian has taken to sleeping in the conservatory. "Oh, how elegant," you murmur. "They do love warmth." She smiles. Not because your remark is clever, but because it's correct. You've acknowledged the Persian's nature without overstepping. You're then invited for a stroll. Outside, the gardens sprawl. The gravel crunches beneath your boots. A young stable boy leads forth the family's prized mare, Isadora. You do not ask to pet her. That would be forward. You do comment on her sheen. "She moves beautifully," you say. The host explains Isadora's lineage, tracing it back 4 generations more than he's ever said about his own ancestors. You nod, feigning interest. You make a mental note of the stable's brickwork. Red brick. Well kept. Definitely upper class. A fringe tidbit here. Some upper-class families entered their dogs and horses into exhibitions alongside flowers, baking, and needlework. These animal shows were judged with the same severity as people. Clean paws, symmetrical ears, a docile temperament. One crooked tail could tarnish an entire family's reputation temporarily, of course, but the whispers were swift. Back inside, a greyhound appears, slender, silent, the very image of grace. It places its head gently on the lap of a guest. The guest stiffens. Error. You, instead, lower your hand and allow a brief touch behind the ear. The greyhound sighs. The hostess sighs. A maid somewhere nods approvingly. You've passed again, but not everyone does. You remember Miss Carlingford, who once offered pork crackling to a bulldog in a white drawing room. The dog accepted. The dog coughed. The dog exploded. The upholstery was never the same. Miss Carlingford moved to the seaside shortly after, for her nerves. NC, you avoid that fate by observing one final rule. Do not compete with the pet. If the host speaks more affectionately to the cocker spaniel than to his wife, you do not comment. If the cat is allowed to leap onto the table and paw at the sandwiches, you smile as if nothing is happening. Because in some Victorian households, pets weren't just companions. They were extensions of the family's dignity. Even Queen Victoria herself kept a veritable zoo at her estates. Pomeranians, collies, parrots, and even a donkey named Jacko. Her dogs appeared in portraits, received titles, and were memorialized with marble headstones. Some say she wept harder over her collie Noble than at certain cabinet meetings. Historians still argue whether this obsession was sentiment or status, or both. You rise to leave. The dog barks once politely. You curtsy to your host. Thank the hostess. Nod to the pug. And as you exit, you resist the urge to check your gloves for fur. That would imply annoyance. And annoyance, in the presence of animals, is the gravest sin of all. Back at home, you remove your boots, your hat, your gloves. You reflect. You talk to people. You talk to dogs. You navigated social tension with poise, charm, and a smile that never quite reached your tired cheekbones. You, dear listener, have just survived the animal round of the Victorian social gauntlet. You may reward yourself with a quiet sit, and maybe, just maybe, pat your own dog if you have one. If not, a well-behaved cushion will do. The sun has dipped once more behind those heavy velvet clouds, and the gaslights hum to life across the hallway. You think you've earned a reprieve, maybe a soft evening in your private chambers, a journal entry, some tea. But no. Tonight, you're visiting a friend's home. You're staying overnight. And that, dear listener, means navigating the most unexpectedly treacherous place in all of Victorian etiquette. The bedroom. You arrive with your overnight case, small, structured, lined with linen, and a mind full of soft dread. Because bedrooms, in this era, are not private sanctuaries. They are stages. Yes, even in your nightgown, you are still on display. The maid shows you in. It's a guest room, elegantly sparse. The bed is large, draped in damask. A fireplace crackles gently. On the side table, a pitcher of water, a Bible, and a tiny bell. You will not touch the bell. Touching the bell suggests helplessness. Unless you faint, then it's allowed. You begin the process of undressing. Not in silence. Never in silence. The maid is still present, helping you remove layers. You pretend not to mind. She pretends not to see anything she hasn't already unbuttoned before. You're finally down to your night attire. A long, high-necked cotton gown that rustles like modesty incarnate. If you're fashionable, it might be white with pale blue ribbon. If you're pragmatic, it's flannel. If you're daring, well, you're not. You place your gloves carefully on the table. Fold your corset. Wrap your hair in a loose braid. No pins. Pins in bed are dangerous and a little alarming. Now you check the bed linen. Yes, really. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian guests were known to bring their own pillowcases embroidered, of course, as a subtle signal of refinement. Some even brought monogrammed hand towels. Linen quality could make or break a social opinion. Toe stiff? Pretentious. Toe soft? Indulgent. Toe worn? Unforgivable. You sit at the edge of the bed and wait precisely 3 minutes. This is to let the household settle. If you clamber under the covers too early, you seem eager. If you wait too long, you're difficult. You blow out the candle, lie back, think clean thoughts. You are, after all, in another person's house. And just as your eyes begin to close, a knock, a soft one. Then the creak of the door. The hostess appears in her evening wrapper, a silk dressing gown designed to look effortless and cost an entire week's rent. She's here, not to chat, but to inspect. She glances at the state of your hair, the neatness of your trunk, the arrangement of your boots. You smile. You murmur, "Thank you. It's all very comfortable." She nods. "That's good," she says. "We do so like our guests to sleep soundly," which of course means do not snore, do not sleepwalk, do not scream, even if the fireplace makes a ghost sound, and definitely do not sneak out into the hallway for water. That's what the bell is for. That's also why you'll never ring it. She leaves. You exhale. Just before sleep, you remember to fold your handkerchief under your pillow. You do not know why. You simply do. Morning arrives, softly, quietly. And now comes the real test. The breakfast entrance. Victorian guests were expected to appear well-rested, freshly dressed, and unfailingly cheerful, even if the mattress was lumpy and the guest room ghost wouldn't stop whispering about the Crimean War. You rise. The maid returns, helps you dress. Again. This time, it's a morning dress, modest, warm, and somehow still requiring 17 buttons. You choose a brooch, just one, a hair ribbon. You wash your face with cold water and pretend it feels refreshing. It doesn't. Downstairs, the dining room is quiet. A few other guests sit behind their newspapers. Someone offers a sleepy smile. You take your place. You do not speak until spoken to. Tea is poured. Toast is offered. Someone asks if you slept well. You say, "Wonderfully, thank you." This is not a conversation starter. This is a passcode. They nod. You are now one of them. A fringe tidbit here. Some Victorian homes kept a guest impressions book, where visitors were encouraged to write something flattering about their stay. Not just thank you, but prose, poetry. One guest once wrote, "The fire sang of comfort, the sheets of cloud, and the company of heaven." He was invited back every year. After breakfast, you return to your room to pack. You fold your nightgown. Straighten the bed yourself just in case the maid reports back. You leave a flower pressed under your pillow, or perhaps a note. Nothing sentimental. Just, "Thank you for your kindness." The lavender was delightful. As you descend with your case, your hostess meets you in the hall. "Do come again," she says, which means either you passed the invisible tests, or you're politically useful. Either way, you curtsy. Thank her. Step into your carriage. You survived the night, and you did not wrinkle the linen. The carriage bumps along the road as you return home, your spine jolting gently with each cobblestone, but your posture remains perfect. You've just spent a full day and night performing your role with exquisite control. Now, back in your familiar surroundings, you think perhaps, just perhaps, you can relax. You would be wrong, because today you are writing thank you notes. Yes, Not one, not two, but at least 7. To the hostess, of course. To her husband. To the maid. Through the lady's maid. To the acquaintance who recommended you. To the friend who lent you that embroidered reticule. To the neighbour who fed your cat. And to one elderly lady who didn't speak to you once, but technically shared her carriage rug with you for 7 minutes. Each note must be handwritten, on cream-coloured stationery. Not white, that's for business. Not pink, that's for scandal. Cream, possibly with a small floral watermark or your initials embossed in the corner, if you're particularly fancy. You sit at your writing desk. The window is open an inch. A bird chirps somewhere far off. You dip your pen into ink and take a breath. Then you begin. Dear Lady Mortlake, I thank you sincerely for the warmth of your welcome and the grace of your table. Yes, this is the tone. Gentle, elegant, grateful but not grovelling. You mention the food, not too much. The decor, briefly, and the company, always flattering. You include exactly 1 sentence of personal detail. I particularly enjoyed our conversation near the conservatory, and remain quite taken with your Persian lilies. She will read that and smile. You hope. Next note. Dear Miss Willoughby, this one must be breezier. She's your contemporary. Your rival, potentially. You thank her for her musical performance, which was tolerable, her companionship, which was strategic, and her recommendation of that forgettable novel. You make a note to never actually read it. Writing thank you notes isn't just etiquette, it's navigation. A slow waltz through social terrain. Each word is weighted. Each phrase is a soft maneuver. You sign your name, fold the paper, choose the envelope, seal it with wax, not red, too aggressive, not black, unless you're still in mourning, but soft gold, or green. You press your seal ring into the wax, lift it carefully, and nod. Perfect. A mainstream historical fact. In the Victorian era, written correspondence wasn't simply communication, it was currency. Letters could build reputations, forge alliances, or undo them completely. There were books, entire manuals on how to phrase condolences, gratitude, apologies, and invitations. One misplaced comma could change the tone from gracious to sarcastic. Historians still analyze preserved letters to determine whether the author meant, "I was honored," or "I survived your soup." Back at your desk, your fingers cramp slightly. You flex them, pick up your pen again. You write to your cousin. She hosted you last season, and you never replied. This note must be both grateful and gently self-excusing. I have thought often of our delightful time in Surrey, and regret deeply that I did not put pen to paper sooner. The spring there was especially soft, like the days we spent on the terrace. You nod at your own phrasing. You've struck the right balance between apology and poetic nostalgia. And then, the final letter. To him. No, he's not your him. Not yet. But he offered you lemonade at the dinner. He complimented your piano playing. He admired your posture while you tried not to choke on a floating island dessert. You hesitator. Do you write? Victorian etiquette would say, not unless he writes first. But there is a loophole. You may write to his sister. Dearest Clara, it was such a pleasure to see you again. Your playing was, as always, perfectly charming. I do hope your brother's cold has eased. It was generous of him to attend despite the chill in the air. You pose. That's enough. Just a mention. A nod across the paper. She will read it. He will know. You sign it, seal it, place it atop the growing pile. The letters are now ready to be posted. But of course, you don't take them to the postbox. You stack them on a silver tray. A maid collects them with the kind of solemn care usually reserved for priceless heirlooms. She disappears through the door, and you exhale. You've done your duty. For now, a fringe tidbit here. Victorian postal service was shockingly efficient. In major cities, one could send a letter in the morning and receive a reply by evening. This made flirtation extremely dangerous. A poorly worded sentence could boomerang back with rejection before tea. Some women kept drafts of every letter they sent. Others burned theirs as soon as they sealed the envelope because once written, the words belonged to the recipient. And in a world where letters were often read aloud to others, that was terrifying. Back in your room, you flex your fingers once more. You've written yourself into grace, into affection, into visibility. You haven't said anything direct. But every loop of ink, every turn of phrase, every delicate wax seal has said, I am watching the rules, and I know how to play. The letters have been posted, the wax seals have cooled, and you've officially navigated the etiquette of gratitude. But just as you begin to think you might coast through the week on polite autopilot, a knock at the door changes everything. Your maid announces, you have been invited to a ball. And not just any ball, the one hosted by the Hargraves. The ones with the marble-floored ballroom, the French chandelier, and the reputation for deciding engagements faster than Cupid with a guest list. This is not a social event, it is a battlefield, and you must dress accordingly. But first, what kind of guest are you? Are you a debutante, still wide-eyed and cautiously hopeful? A third-season veteran, elegant and faintly jaded? Or perhaps a slightly older guest, with the quiet dignity of someone who knows how to deflect an awkward dance request with a glance sharp enough to shear taffeta? In any case, you must prepare. You start with the dress. It must be white or ivory if you're unmarried. That's non-negotiable. Silk is preferred. Lace is encouraged. Sequins? Acceptable in moderation. Too much shimmer, and you're a lantern. Too little, and you're wallpaper. Your corset is tighter tonight, not for structure, but silhouette. You can't breathe, but you look like you've never eaten bread. Victory. Your gloves are long elbow length and white. Your hair is swept up, adorned with a small tiara if you're the daughter of someone important. If not, a modest comb will do. Shoes. Satin. Soft. Utterly impractical. Fan. Required. Smelling salts. Optional but smart. You arrive in a carriage just as the lamps are being lit outside the Hargraves' grand home. You do not arrive early. That's desperate. But you must not be late either. That's rude. There is a 10-minute window in which you must appear like a comet, brilliant and perfectly timed. You ascend the steps, your name is announced, and you enter the ballroom. It is glorious. Candlelight sparkles off mirrored walls. The orchestra is already tuning. There's a glint of diamonds, the rustle of silk, and an atmosphere so charged with social calculation it might spontaneously combust. You take your place along the wall with the other unmarried ladies. Yes, the wall, capital W. The place where you wait to be asked to dance, pretending to look serene and not remotely as though your entire future depends on how quickly someone crosses the floor in your direction. A gentleman approaches. You know him. Slightly. He bows. You curtsy. He asks, "May I have the honor?" You accept. This is the moment. You step onto the floor. The waltz begins. Now, here's where the real etiquette kicks in. It's not about dancing well. It's about dancing correctly. You must follow, never lead. You must smile, never laugh. You must float, even if your shoes are pinching and your partner's breath smells of roasted pheasant. You make small talk, weather, travel, not politics, never money. You say, "Oh, I believe I read that in the Gazette," even if you absolutely did not. You are graceful, effortless. A vision in candlelight. Mainstream historical fact. Dancing was not just entertainment, it was coded courtship. Specific dances had specific meanings. A quadrille? Friendly. A waltz? Intimate. 2 dances with the same partner in one evening? Practically a proposal. Historians still argue whether these rituals reflected sincere romance or were merely stylized negotiations. Probably both. Back to the floor, you're mid-spin when you realize something strange. You are enjoying yourself. Your dress swirls. The music rises. Your partner smiles not just politely but sincerely. You smile back. The candlelight flickers. This might be something. You return to the wall, flushed, graceful. Another gentleman approaches. This one less polished. He steps on your hem. You recover like a swan. You dance again. You converse. You retreat for lemonade. And repeat. There are whispered engagements in the corners. Scandals buried beneath compliments. Eyes follow you. Fans flutter. Gloves tighten. Someone laughs too loudly. A chaperone frowns. The evening stretches out in a blur of violins, conversations, and controlled glances. A fringe tidbit. Some ladies kept a dance card, a small notebook with a pencil. used to record partners for each dance. The most popular women filled theirs instantly. The rest wrote faint names in pencil and hoped no one noticed the empty lines. Yours has been scribbled full. As the final set begins, your first partner returns. He smiles, offers his hand. You hesitate. You nod. The final dance is a waltz. Predictable, romantic, tired, timeless. As you move together once more, there are no words. Just candlelight and string music. Just the weight of etiquette softened into something that might become feeling. You return to your seat. The evening ends. Carriages arrive. Cloaks are gathered. Someone weeps quietly near the vestibule. You're wrapped in warmth and guided to your own carriage. As you ride home, your dress is creased, your feet are aching, and your corset feels like it's bruised your spine. But you smile, not because it was perfect, but because you played the game. And maybe, just maybe, you won. You wake with aching feet and the faint scent of lemon punch still clinging to your sleeves. The ballroom was a whirl of light, lace, and expectations, and now, in the soft quiet of morning, you lie still in bed and let your muscles remember every spin, every curtsy, every whispered compliment, carefully clipped to fit the rules. But before your feet even touch the floor, your thoughts land elsewhere. You remember something he said. No, not him, the other him. The one who always smiles a fraction too late, as though considering the consequences of every expression. He'd said, "There's something refreshing about honesty, don't you think?" You'd replied, "Only when used cautiously." The conversation had lasted 30 seconds. But in Victorian society, 30 seconds could set 1,000 rumours ablaze. And so begins today's performance, the delicate dance of post-ball reputation management. You sit at your vanity as your maid brushes out your hair. Gently, 100 strokes. You stare into the mirror, not for vanity, but for reconnaissance. Is there a glow? Is there a blush? Did you look too pleased when he spoke to you? Did others notice? Victorian reputation wasn't forged in grand gestures. It was built one feather, one glance, one choice of adjective, at a breakfast table over months, and destroyed in an afternoon. Your gown from the previous night is hung to air by the fire. The hem is faintly soiled from the marble tiles. Your gloves are stained with lemonade. The fan you used? Slightly cracked. You make a mental note to replace it, not because it broke, but because it was scene breaking. And everything seen must be controlled. You descend the stairs. At breakfast, there is already talk. Did you see how long he danced with Miss Elstone? I heard he passed up Lady Blythe for the final waltz. You sip your tea. Someone turns to you and says, "You look lovely last night." You smile. Say nothing. That smile is everything. It says, "I know. I appreciate it. But I don't care too much." Because caring too much is gauche. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian society, a young woman's reputation was not just her own. It was her family's, her future children's, and in some twisted way, the entire neighbourhood's. A single misstep, laughing too loudly, accepting too many dances, being seen alone in a corridor, and you could be labelled fast, flirtatious, or the worst insult of all, forward. Historians still argue whether this culture of tight-laced propriety genuinely preserved morality, or simply taught women how to lie convincingly in silk. But back to you. A note arrives. Not a letter. A note. Folded crisply, sealed in plain wax. Your maid hands it to you with an expression like she's offering a grenade. You unfold it slowly. It reads, "Miss, if you will forgive the boldness, I should very much like to speak further on a subject left untouched last evening. I wonder might I request the honour of a walk on Tuesday." R.H. Your breath catches. R.H. You scan your mental registry. Yes. The him with the cravat. The one who spoke softly and smelled faintly of book glue. The one whose dog Horace once sat beside you without barking. He has asked for a walk. You freeze. Because a walk, in this world, is not just a walk. It is a declaration. You do not answer immediately. That would be improper. You must wait at least 1 hour. Possibly 3. Possibly send a reply via your aunt, if you want to make it ceremonial. But you will accept. Of course you will. And now you must prepare. Not for the walk, for the whispers. You consult your wardrobe. A walking dress navy, perhaps, with modest trim. Not your best bonnet, but your third best. Gloves with no embroidery. Shoes polished but not new. You must appear elegant and indifferent. A fringe tidbit here. Some women deliberately scuffed their gloves before outings with suitors to suggest they hadn't planned for the meeting. This was called natural disarray. It took longer to prepare than full evening wear. Later that day, your friend visits. You discuss the ball. She says, "Everyone noticed he asked you for the final dance." You shrug. "Did they?" She smiles. It's not envy, it's awareness. You're being watched now. You'll need to walk with him in public, but not too public. A church path, a garden, a populated promenade where your presence can be witnessed without being scandalous. Your chaperone will trail discreetly behind, pretending to admire ducks. The meeting will last 30 minutes, maybe less. He will say something polite, then something suggestive, then something safely ambiguous. You will respond with interest, wrapped in restraint. That's the dance. You will not touch. You will not linger. And yet, you will leave the walk feeling as though your entire life has shifted by one lace-trimmed inch. You fold his note and place it in a drawer beneath a clean handkerchief. You don't lock it, but you close the drawer with care, because in Victorian England, a lady's heart may remain hidden, but her reputation is always on display. Tuesday arrives in a haze of cool morning air and crisp, filtered sunlight, the kind of day novels are built upon. And today, you are not a guest, not a hostess, not a silent presence at the edge of a drawing room. Today, you are walking with a gentleman. It sounds simple. Two people, a path, shared conversation. But this is Victorian England. Nothing is simple. You rise early, earlier than usual. Not to rush, but to prepare to appear unhurried. Your maid helps you dress in your navy walking gown, the one with the velvet piping that whispers refinement without bragging. Your bonnet is tied precisely tight enough to stay, loose enough to look like you tied it in passing. You do not wear perfume. You dab rosewater behind your ears, delicate, fleeting. If he notices, it will seem accidental. If he doesn't, that's fine too. Anticipation, in this world, must never show its face. Your chaperone is already waiting downstairs. She carries her knitting bag and a look of practiced disinterest. She's done this before, many, many times. The carriage takes you to the public gardens. They're just busy enough, other walkers, other chaperones, a few nurses with prams, enough witnesses to ensure propriety, not enough to interrupt a conversation. And there he is, Mr. R.H. He's early, that's a good sign. Or a dangerous one. Hard to tell. His hat is in his hand. His coat pressed. His expression serious, but not solemn. You step down. He bows. You curtsy. Your chaperone nods barely. And the walk begins. You start along the gravel path, shoes crunching faintly beneath you. The garden smells of damp grass and something faintly citrus. Neither of you speaks for the first few steps. That's expected. Then he says, "I'm grateful you accepted." You smile. It was a lovely morning for it. This is not honesty. It's choreography. He offers his arm. You hesitate exactly 2 seconds, then accept. Victorian walking etiquette. A woman may take a gentleman's arm if offered, but not grasp it tightly. It must be a gentle placement of fingers, not an anchor. Hands clasped behind your back are discouraged. Folding arms across the chest is anarchic. The conversation is mild at first. The state of the roses, the recent rains, a passing mention of the Queen's new publication on family values. You comment on how her dogs always seem more emotionally expressive than her daughters. He chuckles politely. Then comes the shift. He says, "I've always found silence between people far more telling than words." You glance sideways. "That's not about roses." You reply, "Then I hope I'm saying something worthwhile." He doesn't smile. Not yet. But his posture softens. And just like that, the fencing match of coded courtship begins. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In Victorian society, walking together in public, particularly without other guests, was one of the most telling steps toward courtship. If witnessed, it could spark gossip. If repeated, It could imply intention. Some families even arranged walks specifically to test compatibility. He asks about your interests. You answer with measured candor. I read when I can. I play when asked. I embroider when cornered. He laughs. You don't seem fond of embroidery. I'm not, you admit. But it's a quiet way to appear busy. He nods slowly. And quiet effort is greatly admired. You both understand that this is no longer small talk. You round a turn in the path. A bench appears. Your chaperone moves ahead, sitting at a distance, close enough to be proper, far enough to let words happen. You do not sit. Sitting is too intimate for a first walk. But you pause. He clears his throat. Not nervous, prepared. I've found myself thinking of you more often than is reasonable, he says quietly. I hope you don't find that inappropriate. You tilt your head slightly. Only if the thoughts were unreasonable. There's a beat. He smiles. Fully. Finally. I believe they were entirely decent. You don't answer. You don't have to. A breeze stirs your skirt. The sun filters through the leaves like powdered gold. Somewhere, a bird sings something overly optimistic. Your chaperone shifts in her seat. That's the cue. You begin walking again. Now for the most dangerous part, the parting. You approach the gate. He stops. You do too. I'd like to write, he says, if you'll allow it. You pause. This is the moment. The real question under the etiquette. You answer, if your letters are as restrained as your compliments, I shall look forward to them. His eyes hold yours for half a second too long. Then he bows. You curtsy. You step into the carriage. He does not wave. He doesn't have to. A fringe tidbit. In some circles, receiving a man's letter was considered a pre-engagement gesture. Some women saved every note. Others, more clever, replied only once every 2 letters, keeping the rhythm slow and the courtship usefully uncertain. Back home, you remove your gloves and place them beside your fan. You do not tell your aunt yet. You don't need to. She already knows. The walk has been witnessed. The message, silent, subtle, sacred, has been sent. You smile, because for the first time, this doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like something real. The first letter arrives 2 days later. It's delivered with the usual post, a stack of circulars, one invitation to a cousin's recital, which you'll pretend to consider, and one cream-coloured envelope with a firm, modest seal. No perfume. No flourishes. Just his initials, RH, in a clean hand. Your fingers tremble slightly as you open it. Inside, 3 paragraphs, written in smooth, decisive script. He writes about the walk, how he nearly forgot what he meant to say, how you surprised him with your honesty. He includes a small anecdote about his dog, who stole a biscuit from a visiting clergyman. He ends with a quiet wish, that this letter finds you in good spirits, and perhaps leaves you in better ones. You reread it 3 times, and then you do not reply. Not yet. Victorian courtship, after all, is a dance of measured delay. Replying too quickly implies eagerness. Too slowly implies disinterest. You must strike that impossible balance, timely yet coy. 3 days later, you respond. Your letter is light, polished, thoughtful. You ask about the dog. You mention the bloom of the chrysanthemums in your neighbour's garden. You include one vague line, "It's rare to find conversation that feels like rest rather than effort." You know that line will echo in his head. Mainstream historical fact. In the Victorian era, letters were not spontaneous. They were often drafted first in pencil, edited, then copied neatly in ink. Some young women practiced for hours before responding to a single note. Penmanship wasn't just aesthetic, it was moral. Sloppy writing implied sloppy thoughts. Or worse, a lax character. His next letter arrives 4 days after yours. You count them. This one is longer. He thanks you for your words, mentions your phrasing, rest rather than effort. Says he's been thinking about that phrase ever since. And here it is. The turn. He asks, would you consider allowing him to speak to your father? Your breath catches. Because this is no longer a flirtation. This is no longer a path in the garden or a folded fan. This is a proposal not made yet, but implied. And in Victorian England, implied proposals carry almost as much weight as the spoken kind. You don't reply immediately. You take a day to walk alone in the orchard. You remember the sound of his voice, the steadiness of it, the way he didn't try to impress you, only to speak plainly. You return home, sit at your desk, dip your pen. You write, "I believe my father would be open to such a conversation." You include nothing else. That's the etiquette, direct, restrained, and undeniable. The next day, your father is in his study. You hear them speak. Low tones, polite terms, no raised voices, then a pause, then footsteps. Your father finds you in the drawing room, clears his throat. He's respectable, he says, polite, thoughtful. You nod. He nods. Nothing more is said, but everything has changed. A fringe tidbit. In upper-middle-class Victorian households, marriage discussions often began with these formal calls between suitor and father. Sometimes, the woman was consulted afterward, occasionally not at all. But in more progressive families like yours, her consent was quietly assumed as essential. The following week, you receive a final letter before the formal proposal. He writes simply, "I have found more peace in your words than I expected, and more hope in your silences than I deserve. May I offer you both my name and my patience." You fold the letter. You sit very still, and you realize, for the first time, this whole performance, this intricate waltz of gloves and glances and floral paper, has brought you not to a conclusion, but a beginning. Your reply is brief. It contains 3 sentences. "I accept your offer, and your patience, and, in time, your name." You seal the letter with wax. Press your ring into it. As you hold it in your palm, you feel something shift, not in the house, or in your gown, or even in your future, but in you, because this time you didn't follow the rules. You used them, and turned them into something of your own. It happens, as most momentous Victorian things do, quietly. There is no fanfare, no fireworks, no violin swell from an orchestra in the corner. Just a single, whispered conversation in the drawing room between your father and Mr. R.H., followed by a soft knock on your door. He steps inside. Your maid exits without being told. The door clicks shut. He stands there, in a coat you've seen before but now somehow looks sharper. His eyes meet yours, and for the first time there is no pretense. "I've spoken to your father," he says, "and he has given his blessing." You nod. Slowly, carefully. You are not allowed to run to him. That would be indecorous. You do not throw your arms around him. That would be scandalous. Instead, you step forward and extend your hand. He takes it, and that, in your world, is louder than a kiss. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian engagements were often sealed with a handshake and a mutual understanding before the ring ever appeared. Rings came later, often weeks afterward, sized, selected, and shown off at no fewer than 6 afternoon teas. That afternoon, you write precisely 12 notes. To aunts, cousins, friends, and family acquaintances. Each begins, "I am pleased to share that I am soon to be married." No exclamation points, no hearts, just firm, looping script, and the suggestion that this was not only inevitable, but mutually advantageous. The replies come quickly. "Oh, what a lovely match." "You will make such a charming couple. Your mother would be so pleased." You receive 3 bouquets of congratulatory roses, a silver brooch with your initials, and 1 unsolicited book of household advice titled "How to Please a Husband in Every Season." You leave that one unopened. For now. The following week, you are invited to be seen. You and your fiancé attend an opera. You wear lavender. He wears his best cravat. The whispers begin even before the curtain rises. Is that her? She's quite composed. He seems intelligent. A fringe tidbit. The act of being seen together in public was the unofficial engagement announcement. Newspapers didn't publish it unless you were aristocracy. For everyone else, a walk, an opera, a dinner with appropriate chaperones was enough to begin the social ripple. Your hand brushes his sleeve during the performance. He doesn't look at you, but you both smile, just a little. Later, during intermission, a woman approaches you. You know her, Miss Dandridge. She's sharp as vinegar and twice as potent. She says, "You're quite lucky, you know." You tilt your head. "In what way?" She replies, "To have found someone worth all this effort. And there it is. The silent acknowledgement of how much work it has taken not just to find him, but to reach this moment. The dances, the notes, the balancing act between interest and etiquette, the hours of choosing gloves and phrasing, the nights of wondering what every glance meant. The game. You smile. Perhaps the effort made him worth it. She raises an eyebrow. Or you made yourself worth more. You nod. You like that better. Mainstream historians still argue whether Victorian women were liberated through these social rituals, or simply confined in different corsets, linguistic, behavioral, symbolic. But the truth is, many women learned to wield those corsets like armor, and some, like you, turned them into wings. As you leave the opera, the air is brisk. Autumn has crept in early. The hem of your dress flutters. He offers his arm. You take it. You say, "I think I shall enjoy being married." He glances sideways. "To me?" You smile. "To someone who listens." He nods once. "And to someone who sees." You step into the carriage. And just before the door closes, you hear the faintest whisper of congratulations from behind you. From people who now look at you not as a girl waiting to be chosen, but a woman who made her choice. A woman who mastered the rules, and then wrote a few of her own. The wheels begin to turn. The lamps glow soft on the street. And as you sit beside the man who is not just proper but present, you realize something that makes you inhale sharply and exhale with a smile. You made it through Victorian society. And you didn't just survive it. You won. And now, as the lights dim behind your carriage windows and the world outside softens into dusky silhouettes, you feel the long weight of the day begin to dissolve. The lace gloves have come off. The corset has loosened. The fan is folded, and all the carefully chosen words, the carefully timed silences, have drifted into memory like steam from a midnight tea. Let them go. Feel your breath slow as the wheels of your imagined carriage roll gently toward home, where the candles are low and the hearth still glows faintly with warmth. There's no need now for performance. No titles, no salutations, no practiced curtsies. Only you, and the soft rhythm of sleep beginning to settle in your chest like a lullaby written in candlelight. Let your body sink. Heavier, quieter, like lace soaked in lavender. Outside, a garden rustles in the dark. Not the clipped hedges of society, but wild, secret things, ferns and violets, and silent petals that bloom in their own time. Just like you did. Let your thoughts drift like smoke curling from a snuffed taper. Let them fade into stillness, into softness, into the hush between heartbeats where no one is watching, and you don't need to be anything but at rest. You are safe. You are free. You are home.